Okay, and we are live. We have Ozzy Manders Ramses the second, um, and we're covering the topic of beliefs. So, Ozzy, can you tell us a little bit about what beliefs are in general?
Yeah, in philosophy and in psychology, we often characterize beliefs as what are called propositional attitudes, an attitude towards a proposition. So, I mean, to believe something is to think that something is the case, to think that something is true, right? So, if I say the cat is on the mat, that's a proposition, okay? But I can also say it is the case that the cat is on the mat. In both cases, I'm expressing a belief. I can say the cat is on the mat. I can say it is the case that the cat is on the mat, or I believe that the cat is on the mat, or I believe that it is the case that the cat is on the mat. All of those just mean the same thing, that I hold a certain attitude towards the proposition the cat is on the mat, namely that I believe it, that I think it is true, that it is the case. That's what it is to have a belief. And so this is one attitude towards a proposition that you can have. You can have different attitudes. For instance, I can fear that the cat is on the mat. I can hope that the cat is on the mat. I can desire that the cat is on the mat. I can regret that the cat is on the mat. Some of those other propositional attitudes presuppose or require that you believe them. For instance, if I regret that the cat is on the mat, well, that means I have to at least think that the cat is on the mat, right? So I have to already believe that the cat is on the mat before I can get as far as regretting that the cat is on the mat. Whereas if I hope that the cat will be on the mat, right, then clearly I don't think that the cat is on the mat, but I'm wanting it to be the case, right? That doesn't commit me to believing it, right? So some propositional attitudes imply that you already hold another propositional attitude of belief, and other propositional attitudes don't require that you already hold a propositional attitude of belief. So these are not mutually exclusive; they can be combined. So that's a way to think about a belief. It's an attitude towards a proposition. It's the attitude of thinking that the proposition is true, is the case. So that's sort of a simple way to understand what a belief is. And beliefs don't have to be understood as something that is actually being experienced right now. Like right now, if you ask me, Ozzy, are you a Canadian citizen? I'll say, yes, I am a Canadian citizen. I believe that I am a Canadian citizen. It is the case that I am a Canadian citizen. So right now I have a current belief that I am a Canadian citizen. But it would also make sense to say, even when I'm asleep or not thinking about the question, it would be correct to say Ozzy believes that he's a Canadian citizen, right? Even though it's not a current, right? So it's not like a pain. You're only in pain when you're in pain. You only have a toothache when it's hurting, right? Right? You don't have a toothache or a sciatic pain when you're not having those pains, right? But a belief is a dispositional state, a state of disposition. It is something that it is a proposition that you would assent to, even though you're not necessarily assenting and affirming it right now. Okay, so to say that Ozzy believes he's a Canadian citizen, even though Ozzy is not even thinking about being a Canadian citizen, right? So you ask me a week from now, are you a Canadian citizen? In that moment, I will be believing that I am a Canadian citizen. But between now and then, it is the case that I believe I'm a Canadian citizen, even though I might not even be thinking about my citizenship, right? And that's because beliefs are understood to be dispositions. They are what you would be prepared to assent to, were you asked. Okay, so you can understand a belief even just behaviorally as a disposition to behave a certain way, not necessarily something you are espousing right now or thinking about right now. And a great many
So,
of our sorry.
so that, like something like this. Oh, hang on, I'll be right back.
Okay. So beliefs can be explicit and they can be implicit as well. That's another distinction to be made. I explicitly believe that I'm a Canadian citizen, but before you can get as far as believing that you're a Canadian citizen, you have to believe that there's such a country as Canada and that citizenship is possible, right? And that you have to believe that there's such a thing as citizenship, period, and things like that. So beliefs don't exist in isolation. You can't just believe in one proposition. You can only believe in a proposition if you believe in a whole lot of other propositions. You can't believe in you can't believe that the cat is on the mat unless you believe that there are cats, unless you believe there are mats, unless you believe that there is a physical spatial relationship of being on top of and that cats can be on top of mats. So even to get as far as believing a simple proposition like the cat is on the mat requires that you believe a whole host of things that you might never even realize that you believe, right? So even your explicit, conscious, well thought out beliefs or well corroborated, well supported empirical beliefs rest on implicit beliefs, a whole background, a whole network, a web of beliefs, if you will. But so there's no beliefs in isolation, right? Does that make sense so far?
Mm-hmm. So the only question I was going to ask is when you're talking to somebody, say, who was in a car accident. Well, I believe the light was green, but I believe the light was red. Mm-hmm. We're basing that on the ability to see a light, or ability to know we're in a car. So we're assuming, or we're putting all those pieces of data together, and then we can believe this is what I saw, this is what I didn't see. That's kind of what you're talking about. We're building beliefs on littler, smaller pieces of something else.
Yeah, I wouldn't even think of them as little or smaller. I would think of them as deeper and broader and more far-reaching beliefs. Like, before you can get as far as saying, I believe that the light was red when the accident happened, you have to believe that there are traffic lights, that there are colors. You have to believe that your own perceptual apparatus was functioning appropriately and properly at the time, and so that you have a reliable recollection. So you have to believe in the reliability of your memory. You have to believe in the reliability of your senses. You have to believe in the existence of objects external to yourself, outside of your own mind. Because you're not believing that it happened in a dream. You're not believing that you hallucinated. Right. That you're believing that it actually happened, right? So even a simple perceptual belief, a belief that arises causally from a simple direct perception, even that rests on very deep-seated beliefs that are completely implicit, that you never question. You don't question, for instance, that your visual apparatus is working properly moment to moment, right? You only question it if something seems to have gone wrong with it, right? Same with your memory. You only distrust your memory when you have some good reason for thinking that something has gone awry and you're failing to recollect something correctly because of some contradictory piece of information. And even that contradictory piece of information requires that you trust in your senses so that you can trust that piece of information, and that you're trusting your memory, that you're understanding and remembering what that piece of information implies, right? So at any given stage in your thinking about any particular belief, that particular belief is nested in a whole network of other beliefs that are probably completely unquestioned by you. You might not even be aware of all these implicit beliefs. In fact, that's sort of what an implicit belief is. It's all the things that you are committed to without even realizing that you're committed to them. And you can become aware of them. In fact, that's sort of the aim of introspection and self-reflection and philosophical self-analysis is to help yourself understand what your belief commitments are and aren't, that you might not even be aware of.
So if I can, something you said really struck me as significant in what you were saying is that our superficial beliefs, the things that we hold as solid, are predicated at least in part on what are, for lack of a better word, assumptions. We assume that our eye circuits are working properly. We assume that our senses are interpreting correctly and all of that. And so that brings me to this question. Are there empirical and non-empirical forms of belief, or are all beliefs in some sense predicated on, at least in part, some guesswork? And perhaps if there is some guesswork underneath of that, is that guesswork significant or insignificant in terms of being able to hold those beliefs? I know that we have them and hold them for practical reasons, but I'm talking about if you really want to put belief structures through a stress test, is there anything that you could do to substantiate a belief without a doubt? Is there an empirical belief present, or are they all contingent on some nebulous set of assumptions at some level?
Okay. Well, I guess the first thing I would say about the concept of empirical and non-empirical beliefs is to just make sure that we're not talking about empirical, non-empirical beliefs, but but empirical and non-empirical objects of belief, right? So, for instance, I have an empirical belief that this is a human hand in front of me, right? That's an empirical belief. That's a belief about a fact, about a state of affairs that is that can be arrived at through the empire of the senses. That's what we mean by empirical. This is an empirical fact. An empirical claim is a claim that is arrived at through the empire of the senses. In this case, through visual perception and hearing and touch and things like that, right? So, but then there are beliefs that we have that seem non-empirical in nature, right? For instance, if I say, 3 is a prime number, that's the truth of the claim that 3 is a prime number. The veracity of that proposition, of that belief, right, doesn't rest on anything available to my senses. I don't consult my senses. I don't resort to the use of my senses to establish the veracity that 3 is an odd number as opposed to an even number, and that it's a prime. Yes, we can have beliefs about states of affairs or propositions about states of affairs that are empirical, and we can have beliefs about propositions that are non-empirical. But I wouldn't want to claim that all beliefs rest on some kind of empiricism. I mean, it's possible. I mean, that is a theoretical position one could hold. That is a position that some philosophers hold. That ultimately, even our beliefs about things like numbers and raw concepts and geometric shapes and things like that, and logical relations, for instance. If I say A is equal to B, B is equal to C, therefore A is equul to C, I don't have to consult anything in the world to corroborate that that's always going to be true. It's a logical truism, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what A, B, and C are. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C, right? Some people would say, well, actually, even these logical, purely a priori, apodictic, analytical, purely deductive truth claims, even those ultimately rest on experience through the senses. That is not a position I'm committed to, but it's a position I'm somewhat sympathetic to. Does that get to your question?
Yes, it does. I was thinking, too, that you had mentioned that you're Canadian. It seems to me like something like that would be only reified, only made real by virtue of the fact that you believe the abstractions that was built on. So, that there is that kind of a belief, too. So how would you classify that in the realm of empirical versus non-empirical beliefs?
Oh, that's a really great question. Okay, there are all kinds of facts in the world. Okay, there aren't just empirical facts and non-empirical facts, like facts about numbers and facts about human hands and stuff like that. There are facts about objects external to my mind, physical objects, like a human hand, for instance. Okay, but then there can be facts about things like interest rates. Is the rate of unemployment increasing or decreasing? Well, surely there are facts in the world that make that the case, but you can't. That's not an object to be met with in space. You can't bump into the rate of unemployment. You can't bump into an interest rate or something like that, right? There are all kinds of facts, okay? And some facts are what we call institutional facts, social facts, okay? So the fact that I am Canadian rests on the fact that there are all kinds of people out there that believe that there is this country called Canada, right? If people don't hold certain beliefs, certain facts disappear. For instance, what is the value of the U.S. dollar right now? Okay. Well, why does the U.S. dollar have any value at all? The U.S. dollar has value because there's a lot of people out there who believe that these pieces of paper, these individual specimens, can be used as a medium of exchange and can be used in exchange for certain kinds of goods, right? For certain goods of a certain value, okay? If everyone were to suddenly stop believing that these pieces of paper had any value, then their value would literally evaporate. That's exactly what happens when people lose faith in a currency. That's why you can't have too many counterfeit bills in circulation, because it undermines people's confidence in the value of the actual specimens, the real non-counterfeit money. So there are some facts that are social facts, right? The fact that you are married rests on people holding certain beliefs about an institution called marriage, right? The fact that Barack Obama is president of the United States rests on people believing that there's this country called the United States, that there is this office that you can hold called the presidency, and that one arrives at that office through a certain procedure called a general election, and so forth, right? So it is a fact that Barack Obama is the president of the United States, and it's a fact that he's married to Michelle Obama, and it's a fact that the U.S. dollar is worth this much relative to the Canadian dollar, relative to the yen or the ruble or whatever. And all of these are institutional facts. Those are states of affairs that rest on people walking around with certain kinds of beliefs. And if people didn't have those beliefs in their heads, there wouldn't be such a thing as marriage. There wouldn't be such a thing as the United States. There wouldn't be such a thing as the presidency. There wouldn't be such a thing as marriage and dollars and all of that. So there are social facts, not just brute physical facts.
The philosopher John Searle used the term collective intentionality. Is that a representative term of what you're talking about, if you're familiar with that one?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, he wrote a wonderful book I recommend it to people called The Construction of Social Reality. Not to be confused with another book called The Social Construction of Reality. This is the construction of social reality. There is physical reality, but there's also social reality. And things like holding a certain rank, holding a certain title, being married, the existence of money. These are all social and institutional facts that are constituted out of our social reality. They make up the social reality, and the social reality is made up of collective intentionality. That is, it is made up out of people walking around holding certain beliefs in their heads in common. And if we didn't all hold those beliefs in common, if there weren't enough of us believing that, then these social facts would simply disappear.
And that kind of brings us to the fact that a lot of our experience of life is governed by these social constructs or collective intentionality. I think John Searle coined that phrase, but be that as it may, the bottom line is it does appear that our reality, our experience of life, is contingent on a lot of those things. And if you could classify, if you could help us to get a framework for understanding why it is, from your perspective, that people hold on to particular sets of beliefs, because obviously we don't all believe the same way. What is it that attracts us individually and collectively around these certain ideologies? And how would you say, if you can, that those things relate to either having a constructive and fulfilling experience of life or a destructive one? Because you had said earlier that you might fear the cat is on the rug, and so some of us can be paralyzed by fears, and some of us can have beliefs that that actually are counterproductive to our own lives and so forth. So, giving us a framework to understand why it is that some of us hold a particular given belief, and then how that relates to the way we relate to reality in general. That's probably a big question. But if you can summarize that in 30 seconds or less, I'd be really pleased. But
I can't summarize anything in 30 seconds. I can't say my phone number in 30 seconds. But okay, I could take a stab at this. Okay, I guess the first distinction I would make here that would help us understand this question is that there's a difference between believing something, sincerely thinking that something is the case, holding something to be true. There's a difference between that and professing to believe something. Okay, and the reason this is important is because we all do both. We all believe things, but we also all profess to believe things. Now, I believe this is a human hand, and I am professing right now that this is a human hand that I'm holding up, mine specifically. This is my human hand. Okay, I have another. All right, so I both believe sincerely that this is a human hand, and I am professing it. But sometimes we merely profess to believe things that we don't actually believe, and that's where we sort of get into trouble, because beliefs, I think, are generally arrived at honestly. Most people, I didn't decide to believe that this is a human hand. I hold up this hand here, okay, and I can't even I can't muster a sincere doubt that this is my own human hand in front of me here. All right? That belief is caused in me. I didn't decide it. I didn't choose to believe that. Okay? I mean, I'm having visual and tactile and auditory experiences right now and kinesthetic feedback that it is all the reason that one could need to believe. And I believe helplessly that this is a human hand. And I believe right now, if you're looking at this video right now and you see me doing this, that you too believe that this is Ozzy's hand. Okay? And you believe that helplessly. You didn't decide to do it. Okay? It just happens. You are caused to believe things. So there are all kinds of things that we're caused to believe. Okay? And you can be caused to believe things in all kinds of ways. You can be caused to believe things because someone you absolutely trust, like your parents, tells you that something is the case, and they're not in the habit of lying to you, and they have your interests at heart, believing and trusting in the reliability of their reports has served you well in the past, and that this informs your picture of reality. And so the next time they tell you something, you just take it, you just accept it, right? You are caused to believe this. So you believe this helplessly, okay? I think we arrive at our beliefs honestly most of the time. But one of the things that happens, and it isn't dishonest, but it can get us into trouble, is that we can believe a number of things, and then we find out that our beliefs imply something else, which we don't believe. I can believe something, I can believe a whole set of facts, and then someone can point out to me one day, hey, that thing that you believe, it implies this other thing. That other proposition I've never even entertained before. So of course I don't believe it. I don't even have an implicit belief about it. But I recognize that, wait a minute, my existing beliefs that I do sincerely hold imply the veracity of this other thing, which I don't yet believe. Now, a couple of things can happen there. I can say, well, because I'm committed to reason here, I'm going to adopt that belief. I'm going to accept that other proposition is true, because it fits into this web of belief, like a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. It belongs there. So, boom, that's part of my web of belief now. And I will profess to believe what I don't actually yet believe. I might not feel it to be true. I might not actually have the proper attitude towards it, but I will profess to believe it. And in the fullness of time, I probably will come to sincerely accept that proposition as true, though I might, in that moment, just commit myself, pledge my allegiance to that proposition, simply out of loyalty to my existing belief set. Because my existing belief set, as I see it, implies the veracity of that. Okay, so I accept B on the basis of A, because I think that A implies B, and A therefore B, and so I accept B on the basis of A. That's a perfectly rational thing to do. Okay, a difficulty arises though because sometimes you can take on a whole package of beliefs at once, almost like a political party platform, right? You might like and vote for a political party because they stand for certain things that you believe in. They believe things that you believe to be true. Okay, there might be 5 things in their platform that you think they're absolutely correct about. This is the party for me. You pledge loyalty to that party, and next thing you know, because you pledge loyalty to that party, you find yourself mouthing the words, professing to believe, defending other things that you don't actually believe, but that are part of their platform, that you can see go with it, but don't necessarily go with it. They're not required. You know, it's not necessarily a logical relationship that if you believe these 5 things, you have to believe these other 10 things over here. But because you have professed an allegiance, a loyalty to these beliefs and this party or this religion or whatever the case is, you find yourself taking on board other things and merely professing to believe them without any sincere belief. And that, I think, is where we get into trouble. That is where we get into sort of intellectual dishonesty with ourselves. And we find ourselves defending the indefensible. And you can paint yourself into all kinds of corners that way. But the edifice of our belief should be understood, I think, as a map, our picture of reality. And there are holes in our map. And very often we're strongly motivated to want to fill in a section of the map because it's blank and it's uncomfortable to have a great big, there be dragons over this way and there's nothing on the map, right? Nobody wants to live that way, right? We want answers to what we judge based on our other beliefs to be important questions. And so we will sometimes fill in the blanks. We'll sometimes draw in the map simply based on looking at another person's map. And so there are different ways that your beliefs can be caused. They can be caused by good evidence, by good reasons. The facts can impose themselves upon you and occasion a belief in you. But your belief can be occasioned by merely being told that something is the truth from a reliable source. That's a good principle.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I'll just finish the one point.
Yeah.
What can happen, though, sometimes is you can be motivated to believe something, and that motivation can cause you to believe something, and that's not a very good reason. And so I think sort of taking beliefs on board as a package deal out of loyalty is a mistake. My view is that one should never be loyal to one's beliefs. You should never be loyal to your map of reality, right? Your map is there to serve you. You're not there to serve your map, and so you should not be loyal to your beliefs. If you have a reason to believe something, you have a reason to believe something. That's different than having a motivation to believe something. And what often happens when we change our minds is sometimes we realize, I didn't have a reason to believe something, but I had a good motivation to believe it. And part of my motivation was that this belief over here seemed to fit the puzzle pieces nicely. And so I committed myself to this particular piece and saying it goes here, when really I didn't have a good reason. And now I'm starting to see that it doesn't fit so well. And that can cause you to question the whole puzzle, the whole map that you've got laid out so far.
So, if I'm understanding you, what you're talking about right here is sort of like back it up a step and take it into an abstract. This is kind of how we divide along ethnic lines, like the Lithuanians and the Bulgarians and all these people, all in the same region, but very distinctive belief systems about their culture and about how their histories are. Is that kind of what you're talking about, how you divide up in that way? Like you and I live in Manitoba, you live in Ontario. I have a different belief about Canada based on where I live in this country. You know, your experience of Canada is based on living where you do. So I see Canada as a different thing than you do in that sense. So is that kind of what you're talking about? If I base everything that I am and who I am on everything, the only thing that I've experienced from living in Manitoba, I see Canada this way. And then I lose the bigger picture because I hold dogmatically to my Manitobaism. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Is that one way to explain it?
It would include that. It would include that. Your literally your provincialism.
Yes.
It would include that. I mean, we can be very parochial in our beliefs and loyal to sort of our parochial culture, our ethnicities and stuff like that, like ethnic identities and stuff like that. And cultural identities and religious identities and political identities are the kinds of things that inspire loyalty, allegiance, and that I think is a liability. I mean, nobody can escape this completely, right? But I think that anyone who respects the truth needs to try as much as possible to not be loyal to their beliefs and to recognize where your beliefs come from, and that some of your beliefs might be poorly motivated, right? They might come from a sense of loyalty and allegiance to an identity group, and that's a huge. And we're all guilty of this, right? I'm not trying to. When I say this, I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm free of this. I'm as vulnerable to this as anybody. But I think being aware of this liability is one of the best ways to sort of shake off some of its effects, or at least mitigate the harm that this does. So yeah, what you're describing is would be an instance of what I was talking about. It's hard to overstate how much we profess to believe more than we actually do believe. You know, like Robert M. Price has this saying, you know, oh, what a tangle web we weave when first we practice to believe, right? I would say when you profess to believe, professing to believe something is where you really get into trouble. Right. A lot of philosophers do this. One of the things that bugs me the most about philosophers is that they will often profess to believe something that they don't in fact believe, but just because they think they're so horrified by what they think the alternatives are that they will profess to believe a position. They will embrace a philosophical position that they don't actually think is true. They don't live that way, right? They live in a way completely different than what they're professing to believe, but they think that they ought to believe it because they see that this is the only game in town. The other alternatives are not viable. This is the only available thing, and so they will profess to believe it. And that, I think, produces very insincere philosophies, and it produces insincere religions and insincere political movements and things like that. And it gets us into all kinds of trouble. We paint ourselves into corners. We find ourselves defending the indefensible all the time. We find ourselves defending things we don't want to defend, which we would otherwise never be inclined to defend, except that we feel loyal to something that we do believe, right? And that's the hard part, right? Like, my map is right in these respects. I know my map is good in these respects. That would imply that this over here is true. Yeah, but I have some reason to think that it's not, or I don't actually think that it is true, you know? Well, so what? I'm just going to be loyal to my map, right? And then we get into terrible problems when we do this, because it's hard to reason your way out of something like that, because if belief works like a web, if it's a network, as I'm suggesting, it's actually hard to lose, to abandon something like that once you've woven it into your web of belief, because it affects everything else in the web, right? You can pull out a strand, and that affects the whole web. If I rip out one thing that I'm committed to, even if I'm not sincerely committed to it, but I think it belongs in the web, once you pull on a strand in a web, that affects all of the tensions and forces in the web. The whole web has to sort of be, the forces and tensions all have to be recalibrated, right? So while it's possible to remove a strand from a tapestry or a strand from a web or something like that, it doesn't happen without affecting the rest of the tapestry or the rest of the web. There will be effects that will reverberate throughout the whole network of beliefs, and that's why very often you'll have people who will cling to a view just because of what they fear the consequences would be of abandoning something. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. We've all heard this. Religious people who will say, if I were to not believe in God, my moral vision would just collapse. I wouldn't know how to live my life, because God is an important gear in all of my mental machinery. All of my moral calculations involves trying to figure out what God wants. And if there is no God in there, I don't know how to engage in moral reasoning. Their moral imaginations are a little bit crippled in this respect. And consequently, they think they can never seriously entertain objections to a belief in God or their particular theology or whatever it is, because they think doing so would evacuate their life of genuine morality, of value, of significance, of meaning, of purpose, and they realize that that would be a consequence to their entire belief set. Right? God is not an inconsequential strand in their belief set. It's like the most important strand as they see it. Everything rests on that strand, and they think the whole web will collapse. And so it doesn't matter how much reason or evidence that you put forward against a particular political view or a particular religious view or whatever the view is, if that view is plugged in to everything else that they believe and value, they're not likely to give it up, right? And nor should they give it up lightly if that's their view, if that's how it seems to them, right? You shouldn't be quick to just throw away your map. You know, redrawing your map is one thing, but if someone says, "Oh no, the very basis of your map is messed up," you know, you've got north and east reversed here. You know, your whole map is messed up. Well, then you've got a problem. No one wants to redraw the whole map. It's very, very disorienting to carry through on the analogy.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that sometimes we forge beliefs predicated on some social necessities, and perhaps we consider that re-examining the whole premise on which our belief structure stands might somehow crash our whole navigation systems and all of that. But I don't think that, if I'm correct, most of us don't negotiate a self-examination of ourselves so that we're questioning the foundation of our beliefs all the time. We just sort of gravitate to this or that and do it sort of organically, as opposed to predicated on some kind of a filter where we're using empirical reality to sort of try and true what we believe, and we're shifting our provisional beliefs based on that. So do you think that there is a social component to belief that arises as an extension of the dependent nature of human existence. In other words, we've needed a tribe, we've needed a group, and maybe we've translated that into an ideology that we cling to as an extension of that whole foundation of needing to belong to something. So sometimes we belong to a group, but sometimes we'll just belong to an ideology. But belonging is the common thread that follows that. Do you think that there is some sort of a social or relationship binder that tracks us to center ourselves on a certain belief that happens without necessarily us being aware of why it is that we believe the things we do? So you said something that really struck me, and that was that a person may not want to reevaluate their whole navigation system because of its disorienting. But you know, I'm not sure that people actually go through that thought process. I mean, I know that that's a common framework for you, but I don't know that that's a reality for most people, that they would not even recognize that there's an emotional component to why they believe what they do and why they hold the beliefs that they do. And I'm just wondering if you agree and can see also, as I am thinking I see, that there is kind of an emotional component to the belief structures that we have that's sort of predicated on our instinctive nature and just the nature of our existence in general.
Yeah. Well, let me address the second point first about. Well, no. Let me start with at the beginning. The word religion, religio, it comes from this, ligare, this root word that means to bind, right? That's what religions do. They bind people together, among other things, right? Like ligaments, right? Religio, that's where that comes from, right? The yeah, for James. Religions bind us together. Identity politics bind us together. Politics binds us. These things bind us, but they also divide us, because if the people in this hangout are all bound by certain values and background beliefs, that binds us together, but it alienates us from other people who are bound by different values and commitments. Yeah, I mean, belief is about what you think is the case, okay? But there aren't just sort of ordinary brute facts in the world that are quickly decidable and easy to agree on. There's all kinds of things that you can believe that can inform your life, that can be emotionally gratifying, that can foster social cohesion and cooperation and mutualism and trust and peace of mind, so that you can sleep at night and trust your neighbors and stuff like that. There are different ways that there are different states of affairs that you can imagine to be the case, that you can sincerely believe in. And those can be different from what other people believe, that will do the same kind of work, right? There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to structure a society. There's more than one way to build value and meaning and purpose and significance in the world. And that's what we find. And so people are motivated by emotional needs. We need peace of mind. We need to be able to sleep at night and not sleep with one eye open. We need to be able to trust. We need to be able to cooperate. We need to be able to be altruistic. These are all things that are actually human needs. This is just a function of the kinds of critter that we happen to be. If we were spiders, it would be different. If we were horses, it would be different. But being the kinds of creatures that we are, we have certain kinds of emotional needs. And our belief set, our belief structure, our picture of reality doesn't just include quickly decidable sentences about empiricals, easily verifiable empirical states of affairs. It includes commitments to values, right? Things that give you purpose and give you your goals and things like that, and which bind us together. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. So some of our beliefs are the empirical ones that you were talking about, the ordinary ones, right? But then a lot of our beliefs are quite extravagant, metaphysically extravagant, even. Right? You can posit a whole other reality, right? On another plane, in another dimension, right? Heaven and hell and things like that. These are things that infuse us in this world with meaning, and they can bind us together, and they can also divide us and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, beliefs can be rational or irrational, but even when they're completely rational, you can disagree with another person who's also being rational and has a different set of commitments. And I should say that although I think that if you're in the business of believing something, you're in the business of believing something to be true. You're concerned with truth. That's what beliefs are. Beliefs are a concern for truth. Okay, beliefs are not a concern for cohesion and getting along. Okay, that is a value that we have that can infect our beliefs, affect our beliefs, infect our beliefs, pervert our beliefs, subvert our beliefs. But the objective of belief, I think, is the truth. That's what we're after when we're believing something. But that's not to say that it's just this purely cerebral thing that has nothing to do with emotion. Of course, emotions and values and human needs and human longings absolutely infect the entire enterprise of what we think is the case. So, I mean, does that help? Does that address your concern?
Yeah, if I understand your perspective, that if we are chasing beliefs in its purest form, then we are looking for realities. But I do think that there is some malleable factors that go into the reasons that we believe things. It's just a suspicion. I don't have any hard evidence about it, but I suspect that part of the reason that we believe the things we do is because of some social realities. And so then the reason I say that is because if a person is brought up in a certain cultural climate, their inclination is to believe according to that cultural climate. And I know that we forge at least the seminal portions of our belief in the context of a period of time in our developmental life where we are almost entirely dependent on the people around us to feed us what it is that we're being nourished on. I think that probably has somewhat of a factor. But let me ask you this question. Can a person change their beliefs? Can they just choose one thing or another? And the reason I ask that is not because I necessarily think it, but because some people claim that you can, if I understand it correctly, that you can just choose a belief.
Yeah, that's a view called doxastic voluntarism. Doxastic is just a fancy word that means belief. It pertains to belief. It's where we get words like orthodox just means right belief. That's what doxa is. Okay, so doxastic just pertains to belief, and voluntarism means voluntary. So doxastic voluntarism is just the view that you can just will yourself to believe things, and I don't think we can do that. I don't think that beliefs are actions. I can will my actions. I can will my arm to go up. I can will to turn my head. I can will certain words to come out of my mouth right now. I can profess to believe things. That's an act, right? I can actually believe something, and I can profess to believe it. And when I profess to believe it, when I affirm it, when I say that I believe X, that's an action. But believing X, that's not an action I perform. I believe things helplessly. I didn't decide or choose to believe that this is a human hand, okay? And so I think that we arrive at our beliefs. I think the way to think of beliefs is as product, output. Right? Your brain is in the business of trying to create a map of reality, a representation, a picture of the world. Okay, and your beliefs are the output. Your belief set is that picture, and we arrive at that helplessly. Now, of course, you can profess to believe something. That is, you can believe something helplessly, and as I said, on the basis of what you helplessly believe, you can decide that something ought to be true, that something goes with it, goes along with it, and you can desire that to be the case. And in the fullness of time, if you sort of train your attention selectively in certain ways, you can condition yourself to eventually sincerely believe that which you were merely professing to believe on the basis of things you did sincerely believe, right? So you can. It's not that we can't eventually, by acts of will, come to believe something, but you can't directly will yourself to believe something. I mean, it's a challenge I put to a lot of religious people who believe in doxastic voluntarism. You think I can just will myself to believe in God? You think it's a decision that I can just make? No. I mean, if that were true, go ahead. You do it. You, the religious person, do the opposite. Right now, I want you to sincerely believe there's no God. I'm not asking you to mouth the words, there is no God. I'm asking you to sincerely believe that there is no God. See if you can do it. Anyone who sincerely believes that there is a God can't just will themselves to suddenly stop believing in God, right? That's just ridiculous to suggest that one could do that. The reason I think people are inclined to believe in doxastic voluntarism is they confuse the fact that we can be so motivated to want something to be true that eventually we can come to believe something to be true, usually by selective attention and ruminating on a certain fact, or ruminating on certain facts. We can come to believe something. But that's not directly willing yourself to believe something. And the other reason I think that people want to believe in doxastic voluntarism is their theology, certain theologies, not all religions are like this, but some theologies reward you. They promise salvation and they threaten damnation on the basis of what you believe, right? Well, that would be unjust if if you couldn't just decide to believe something, right? If belief wasn't an act, and so they have to imagine that belief is an action that you perform. So I think that people are really, for theoretical reasons, committed to the idea that belief is an action. They imagine that belief, because belief is a commitment, they think that it's a conscious commitment, a deliberate act of allegiance, of pledging allegiance. Okay, look, when I believe something, okay, it means I'm committed to the truth of the proposition. Okay, but I didn't decide to commit myself. I found myself helplessly committed to the truth of a proposition, right? But people sort of get confused about this idea of a commitment, and because a lot of people feel a loyalty to their beliefs, they then think of belief as a kind of loyalty. They think of it as a kind of act of commitment, a commissive act. Okay, but it's not a commissive act, right? When I am committed to the truth of a proposition, I didn't actively commit myself. It wasn't an active commitment. I find myself committed in the sense that I helplessly believe something to be true.
Can I toss something into here?
Sure. I have to leave momentarily, so
okay.
I'm gonna have
it's just a quick thing.
Sure.
A lot of the Christians have there's a verse in Romans that says if you can believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you become born again. That's the process of belief is based on an act of will and a physical action of doing. So that's right what you're talking about. That's the act of believing.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think of, like, Pascal's wager, right? I mean, Pascal wasn't a fool. He knew that you couldn't just will yourself to believe something, okay? But he did believe that you can fake it until you make it. You can profess to believe something and play the part of a religious person, and eventually, in so doing, the truth of the proposition will impress itself upon you, and you will then sincerely believe, right? And so he came up with Pascal's wager as a way to sort of get you there. Here's a crutch. This will help you get there. But he didn't think that you could just will yourself to believe in the existence of God on the basis of the wager. He just thought that the wager will help you eventually get there, right? You literally just fake it till you make it. Just realize, hey, it would be in my best interests, and I will motivate myself to the point that eventually I will start to see the facts differently. Right? And that can happen. That does happen. That is a psychological fact. We change our beliefs, but it's what we don't consciously change them through an act of will. Right? There are acts of will that result in our beliefs being changed, but it's not an act of will that just changes your belief. That doesn't happen. Right? I mean, if you think of the occasions when you just changed your mind, right? Very often it has happened in the very teeth of what you wanted to believe. Right? Whether it happens slowly or suddenly, right? And then, of course, we can all look back on things where we've come to believe them and we realize, I really wanted to believe that to be true. I studied that subject up, in depth. I put aside my doubts. I rationalized ways to get around problems and objections to my view. I engaged in apologetics to support and sustain my view. And next thing you know, I came to be convinced of what I wanted to be true, that it was true, right? And at that point, yep, you're not merely professing to believe anymore. You, in fact, are professing to believe what you now sincerely believe, even though you didn't start that way. So yes, we can change our minds. We change our beliefs, but we don't do it through a simple act of will. That I submit that you can just change your mind. You can just suddenly believe something through an act of will. That I think is a psychological impossibility. I don't think anyone can do that.
But you would agree that not examining your beliefs is a recipe for holding on to them, whether they are appropriate, inappropriate, or constructive or destructive or whatever. So, if that's the case, what would you say the value is of examining the foundations on which one's belief stands, and how would you texture that in the light of the context of the fact that some people, if they examine their beliefs and found out, let's say, for instance, that a particular religion wasn't true, that could have severe social implications. So, you know, I'm just wondering about the efficacy, the value of really pursuing beliefs to their core for some people, given their social context, their cultural context.
Well, I think thinking of beliefs as a map helps here. Okay, if your map serves you well, and most people have a map of reality that serves them well. That's why it's their map of reality, right? There are people who go through their whole lives believing in, you know, just complete fantasies. Right? You can believe in some cockamamie political idea or religious idea, or cult or whatever, and you'll get through life, right? And that's because most of the time, the falsity of those beliefs doesn't rub up against reality in a way that occasions you to think, oh, something's really wrong here, something's got to give. Okay, it's only through some serious self-reflection and a desire to be right, valuing the truth very, very highly, making that high in your index of priorities, that you will decide, you know what, I'm going to be willing to jettison some views if I don't have good reasons for them, and I will take on board views when I do have good reasons for them, even if I don't like them. Okay, that takes a certain kind of commitment. That takes that rests on where truth rests in your index of priorities, and I think truth is fairly high in almost everybody's index of priorities, but for some people it's higher than others. Okay, but if you don't think about your map or about your belief set, you're likely to go through life and only change it in those instances where your commitments just clash so hard with reality that you helplessly entertain doubts, and eventually those doubts give way and you abandon the belief. Okay, so if you are not sort of introspective and critical of your map, if you don't think of yourself as going through life drawing a map and revising a map and erasing parts of a map and drawing new parts of the map, if you don't think of yourself as that kind of thing, right, as engaged in that kind of enterprise, then you're going to do what everyone does. You're going to go through life with whatever map you have, and it'll change. There'll be some abandonment of beliefs and adoption of beliefs and revision of beliefs, but it'll happen more slowly and perhaps not for the best of reasons. It'll happen probably because of social pressures. It'll happen because of motivational biases and things like that, and less for the proper epistemological reasons. You won't be doing it for out of concern for epistemic virtues. You'll be doing it purely for pragmatic reasons, and you're more likely, I think, to engage in a practice of belief preservation and belief maintenance, right? Trying to preserve the integrity of your map out of a loyalty to your map. So that I think is a problem. So to me the value of consciously looking at your beliefs and trying to reevaluate them stems almost entirely from the decision at some point to value truth, to be concerned with truth. At some point you just find that you value the truth a lot, and that drives you to reevaluate your beliefs more than you otherwise would have. But there is a problem, though. I mean, you can be concerned with the truth, and even though you're concerned with the truth, at some point you can hit upon what you think is such a good map that nothing is going to significantly change this map, and then you can just sort of get locked into a rut. I mean, that can happen to all of us. It does happen to all of us at some points in our lives. But I think ultimately that a preoccupation with truth is what is going to govern how willing you are to change your map. I mean, if you think about open-mindedness, what could open-mindedness mean other than the willingness, the degree of amenability your belief system has to good reasons and good evidence? I don't think that open-mindedness can mean anything other than that. It's not a willingness to change your mind. It's a willingness to value good reasons and evidence. There are lots of people that have open minds in the sense that they'll just change their minds at the drop of a hat, right? Something sounds good. Oh yeah, okay, boom. I mean, I have a friend in my, and actually our friend is an in-law who changes her beliefs constantly. They're just constantly evolving, constantly changing, but for the worst of reasons. She just likes the sound of something, right? It just sort of appeals to something emotionally in her, and poof, she's on board with that, and she's rejecting something else that she formerly held for the same crappy reasons. Okay, that is not a person with an open mind. Okay, that is a person who changes his or her belief set very, very easily, all too easily, but not for the right reasons. Open-mindedness, I think, has to be understood as the opposite of dogma. Dogma is sort of a resistance to good reasons and good evidence out of a misplaced loyalty to one's picture. Okay, but open-mindedness is just the amenability, just the willingness to revise one's belief in the face of good evidence and good arguments, and not revise them for other reasons. If you're revising your belief set and your map for crappy reasons, that's not open-mindedness. That doesn't make you dogmatic either, but it's neither open-mindedness nor dogmatic. So the friend that I was describing, this in-law that I was describing, is neither open-minded nor dogmatic, just kind of profoundly irrational.
Yeah. If you could, so let's say a person, and I know you have to go soon, so I do appreciate you sharing with us. If you could give somebody who wanted to examine their beliefs a place to go, a book to read, a website to visit, or whatever, so that they could get started doing that, what would you recommend?
Boy, that's a good question. I've never been asked that. Well, I'd recommend a good philosophy course, but you never know if you're going to get a good philosophy course or not. I start with a little book like Bertrand Russell's The Problems of Philosophy. You don't have to love philosophy. You can even be allergic to the concept of philosophy and gain a lot from that little book. And what's good about that little book is it introduces you to some chestnut problems in philosophy, and they're chestnut problems in philosophy because they are really hard problems, and they are things. It covers things that we all have opinions about and tend to be strongly committed to, and assumptions that we tend to make that we have never challenged. And any book, and that's a good little book that makes you look at what you thought was the ground that you're standing on that was unshakable, unquestionable. Any book that does that, that makes you go, oh, wait a minute, that which I assumed as a given is not given, right? That which I thought was self-evident isn't self-evident. As soon as that happens, all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute, right? I could be wrong about a whole ton of things that I thought it was impossible for me to be wrong about. And that, I think, is a good place to start. Any book that will do that, and I think that little book, you can read it in a couple of sittings, actually, can have that effect, make you go, wow, things that I absolutely thought were rock solid, and that I could build the whole edifice or the whole web of belief out of this stuff. And it turns out that's not so secure. There are good reasons for doubting that, and there are different ways of looking at this. That would be a place to start, a book like that. Given time, I could probably think of other titles, but that would be a good place to start. It has the virtue of being very, very short.
If I could summarize at least my perspective of what you've shared so far, is that the value of the question is the centerpiece there, at least as far as I've been able to tell based on what I've heard from you, that asking the right questions is really what can open a lot of doors that can help us to understand ourselves better and hopefully by extension navigate a little bit better.
Yeah, if I really have to go right now. Actually, I'm going to be late for an appointment. But yeah, if I could say one thing, a maxim would be question everything. That doesn't mean doubt everything. You can't look. I can't fake certainty. I mean, I can profess to be certain about things I'm not. I can feign certainty, but that's bad advice. And feigning doubt pretending to doubt things that you don't actually doubt, that too is a form of intellectual dishonesty, right? But you can question everything. Skepticism isn't doubt. Skepticism is interrogation. It's questioning. And you can question everything without having a single doubt about it, right? And the problem is, though, very often when people don't have a doubt, they won't question. If they don't question, they won't doubt. And they think that the only way to doubt is to question. And that's not true. You can question something without doubting it. And really, that is sort of at the heart of critical thinking and skepticism, is questioning things even when you don't doubt them.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. I know you have to go, and I do appreciate everything.
Thank you, Ozzy.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation. This was great fun. Have a good day.
See ya.
All right, Helena.
I never want to talk when Ozzy's there because
I know.
Because he just gives so much fodder. It'd be stupid to talk while he's talking.
Yeah, it is interesting when you're listening to him. But you know, and talking about doubt, I mean, when you are dogmatic in your theology, doubt is a sin. So that's why you don't see a lot of critical thinking from them.
Yeah.
Because they're not allowed to. It's questioning God is a sin. The book makes that very clear. And depending on your level of fundamentalism or your liberalism is how much you question and how much you doubt. But hardcore, they just don't doubt. They can't, and that's a problem.
It makes sense. If you want to hold on to a religious belief, doubting would not be a good thing to do.
So, Helena, what would you say are the main takeaway points based on what you've heard this morning? And I know that's a huge, Ozzy, when he talks, he always delivers a huge meal that takes a long time to digest.
Yeah.
So, and that being the case, but what are your initial impressions of...
Okay, so my initial impressions. First of all, I did want to get clear. He was really careful when I was first coming in about how he was using his words. And I wanted to clarify that, but I didn't get a chance to, but that's kind of tangential. For me, sort of the takeaway from this little Ozzy lecture are this idea of institutional facts, and he gave the example of social facts. I don't know that it's a good idea. I really wonder, I really worry that I suspect it's a bad idea to claim that sort of convention is can have the same, I don't know, properties that make them fact in the same way that physical facts.
You mean
fact.
In terms of collective intentionality?
Collective intentionality, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so the first thing is collective intentionality. To me, seems virtually the same as sort of social convention. And if that's true, and even if it isn't true, deciding that those are facts in the way that physical facts are facts, to me is, at least on first blush, more dangerous than not doing so. I don't see the advantage of doing that.
Well, how would you have money then, if you didn't have collective intentionality? Because money rides on collective intentionality, as John Searle defines it.
Sure, you can have collective intentionality, and you can have agreed upon definitions like what marriage means, and it can require all people to agree about, for example, the value of money and the value of the symbolism of money and all of that. I think that is for sure something that can and does and should occur. I don't know if it's. I suspect there's a danger in claiming that those are therefore facts in the same way that physical facts are facts.
Yeah, I guess you could wrestle into semantics and what words would be best used to precisely describe them. And listen, language only has a certain carrying capacity anyway. So
yeah, but it's not just calling it facts. I don't just mean the language part, although of course that's part of it. But I just mean considering them to be facts in the way that we consider physical facts to be facts. I don't just mean calling them facts.
I also think that we human beings, just generally speaking, don't often consider the relationship between something that is more of a direct fact, like if I walk off this cliff, I'm going to fall down to the rocks below, or this is the president, and there is no, and that's a social construct. So I don't think that, normally speaking, people have parsed reality enough to differentiate between those two events in a broad sense. And if they haven't, then you can be subject to believing things that are contingent on, let's say, authority and all sorts of abstractions that are built on abstractions that are only reified by our belief in them. But even if those things are vapor in terms of the foundation on which they're formed, they do have real-world implications. And I think maybe that is what you are sensing, is something that is, wow, this is a really dangerous weapon if it's used in the wrong hands. But that's the world we live in, and in fact, that is the right and the wrong hands that that sort of power is wielded, from my perspective. Would you agree? I mean, is that what am I hitting on the thing that you're uneasy about?
It's not exactly what I'm uneasy about. So maybe my unease is too technical or too trivial, right? Because I do agree with everything you've said, and obviously it is that way, right? We are that way. But it's just something about giving it the title fact, giving those kinds of things the same title fact as we do physical facts. I think the implications in calling it a fact just the same as you would call a physical fact a fact are deep and can get us into trouble. It's not that I think the trouble is that if everybody believes it, there could be sort of political implications, or the powerful could abuse that belief or anything like that. Because I think that would be true, regardless of whether or not they're really facts. Right? Go ahead.
Can I think what I think you're trying to say? I think it's like we have a perception about Group A. Group A is green. Might not be true, but if we treat it as a fact, then how many different ways can we say, well, I hear all these people, they start believing they're green because they've been told they're green. And over the years, they become the green people. And everybody around them thinks, well, they're just the green people. Like, we all hear these preconceived notions of what group A, B, C, pick a group are, because of who they are. Like, we think, is that kind of what you're talking about? They're not necessarily true, but it becomes a perception, it becomes a belief about a group. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it is kind of like that. So I guess I want to make a slippery slope argument, right? It's easy to agree, if you will, that institutional facts like interest rates and money and things like that could be considered facts. But then you're like, well, where's the dividing line? If we consider those facts, then other just conventions could also very easily be considered facts. And then I think once you decide some convention is a fact in reality, in the way that physical facts are, it doesn't help our tribalism any, I guess.
We already do that.
And I think that could be a problem, right?
It is a problem.
It is a problem. Yeah, in fact, I think that is social currency is the coin of the realm that powerfully shapes our experience. And I don't know whether it's equal terms. I wouldn't know how to measure the difference between physical belief systems and how they affect our experience and social. Whether one's bigger than the other, maybe they fluctuate. I don't know, but of a certainty, both of them are a factor in what we experience as life. And I think that is why so much energy goes into people controlling narratives and so forth. And my guess is, too, that when we face situations, maybe physical situations, where we feel powerless and so forth, we might even retreat. As part of our fight or flight mechanism, we might even retreat to ideological things that we can construct, because that is the real currency with which we can actually control and manipulate reality on a whole other term than by actually moving physical dirt and so forth.
We see that every day.
Yeah, right. So if that's why I think it might be better for us to sort of only consider facts, sort of the physical facts, and consider these other sort of things that are the obvious cases, that like marriage and interest rates and things like that, where we would just seem to readily agree, yeah, sure, those exist in a way, right? I would want to say it's probably better not to do that than to do that, because when you get into the more complicated things, you become less flexible. You start arguing about whether or not this or that potential construction is a fact or not a fact, and it just, to me, doesn't help our situation as a humanity as a whole.
You're right.
To do that kind of thing. It risks POMO more than not doing it. That's the way I think.
Yeah, it strikes me as being somewhat of a package deal. So if we have monetary units that we use as a placeholder to translate values back and forth, and that enables a whole level of sharing amongst humanity that would not be enabled if there weren't such a, not only a concept, but actually physical symbolic representations and so forth that we use to trade back and forth. And that, to me, has enabled quite a bit of benefit, but it is on which a lot of destructive things have happened too. And so I think maybe the issue here at hand might be the fact that along with something that comes with power, that power could be directed towards positive, constructive things and negative, destructive things, and that is the real issue. And what you are saying, and you have witnessed, much to your lament and mine too, is that those arguments that go back and forth, the way that narration is used as a mechanism for tribalism and all sorts of awful things like war and such, are part of the outcome of that as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, if we think about sort of extremes, like, I don't know, extremely religious people who believe that the things that can't be proven physically or even empirically, but maybe that's not the right word, but that those things are nonetheless as factual as the physical facts, then that group, you know, more strongly defends those things because they think they're absolutely, literally true. Yeah. And so making a gray area like collective intentionality yields social realities that really exist in the same kind of way that physical reality exists, to me, is more dangerous than not doing that.
Yeah. Well, okay,
let's try to eliminate all social realities from the equation. What would we take away? We would take away authority structures. So there could be no president. There could be no leadership realm. There could be no
I disagree.
Person that.
That's that's not what I'm intending to say. I'm just intending to say that rather than say, oh, those things are just as factual as physical facts, we instead keep in the back of our mind, those are conventions that help us work, right? That help society stay glued together. But nonetheless, they're conventions. And trying to sort of erase the idea that those are conventions, that are, that those are agreed upon things we all sort of agree to say and act as if true, rather than really saying that they're true, is a better idea. That's kind of where I'm going.
An example I think of what you're talking about simply is what's going on with the founding fathers in your country. All of a sudden, you have a Christian nation because people have been told that for a generation now. And you've got people believing this because it's been told to them over and over. Even though it's a lie, it can be proven to be a lie. They want to believe that to promote their view, and it agrees with their social belief that they are a Christian nation, and people embrace that. And whether it's true or not is irrelevant. It becomes the monologue. It becomes the the dialogue in all conversation is, yes, we are a Christian nation. That's a scary thing to believe. I mean, it's no different than what was happening in 1930s Germany. Really, it's the same thing. You keep saying it long enough, and people, oh, okay, well, it must be true, whether
And
they
there are
think
more
it or not.
insidious. There are more insidious forms of that. Like, for instance, the climate change deniers might be arguably of the same ilk. That there are destructive consequences that come about as a result of us latching on to what is social reality as opposed to what is more empirically grounded, and using that as fact. And so, to Helen's point, I think absolutely what she's saying is completely true. But if we switch the word from factual to social convention or whatever, I don't think that would end the argument, because maybe I'm just being too cynical, but it seems to me like people would then argue over which social convention to and the emphasis that we should place on this idea or that in order to maintain a social convention, because this would be better or that would be better.
But we already do that.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
That's why there's 220 countries in the world.
At least the issue of whether or not it was actual fact wouldn't be as hotly debated. It would move on. It would be about the consequences and sort of the implications and that kind of thing. You could get past that crap of it's actually true, the same as some physical fact. Maybe. I don't know.
Hey, the axiom I use is that the person that defines the argument has already won.
Oh, whoa, what? Tell me a little about that.
Well, I'm just saying that the person that defines the argument has already won. So, do you still beat your wife? Listen, are you an idiot or a moron? The person that defines the argument, and I'm using very simplistic ways of doing, for illustrative purposes here, but what I'm saying is that the person who carries a particular paradigm has already won. So if I come at you with God exists, and if you think God doesn't exist, then my question to you is, do you think God is real? So already in the premise of my question, God is real. It's in the premise of the question. And so ultimately I've defined the argument, and so you can agree with me or be wrong.
Or I could say you're begging the question.
Okay, so let's take that example.
Begging the question.
Let's take that example and let's see. So in my opinion, at least now when I'm first thinking about it, if the social convention were that social conventions are social conventions and not facts like physical facts are, it would be easier to talk with that person.
Social convention, by implication, means it's adaptable, because it's not this, it's sort of this. And there's more room in this than there is in this. But so social convention is this, then that can't change. It is what it is. But if social convention is something that we are willing to discuss and we're open to discuss, like drinking and driving. 50 years ago, it wasn't an issue, and then it became an issue. And now it's something that we've talked about, and it's not a good thing. So socially, it's not good to drink and drive. People still do it, but they know they're going against what society thinks is a good thing, because that became part of the narrative.
Exactly. That's a good example. I guess I'm just suggesting that I think it's a better idea for societies to only think of reality as the physical. And I guess that shows a real bias on my part. But if we could all do that, then it would at least separate sort of the physical from the non-physical. And then our discussions about the non-physical would perhaps take on a different form. They wouldn't be squabbles over whether or not there was reality in them, right? We could just sort of talk about instead advantages and disadvantages to a society, holding that dear to them and that kind of thing.
We do seem to bounce between physical reality and the Matrix with quite a bit of relative ease.
Attaboy, Joe.
Thank you very much, made it myself.
That was amazing.
But the bottom line is, we do have the capacity to manipulate reality in different ways, and one of those ways is to figure out how things fit together and be able. So you can't construct a bridge by making an argument about it necessarily. You have to fall within the lines of physical reality. So to your point, Helena, I see what you're saying as here are the things that we can do predictably and going forward, where this other thing is sort of this malleable mess, even though it does confer some benefits if we use it appropriately. In other words, if we have an underlying value of having each other's backs, then the fact that I might not be able to squint my eyes and believe something that you're conveying to me based on authority and so forth doesn't necessarily preclude you from being valid as a human being. It doesn't necessitate my view that you shouldn't even be alive because you don't believe this particular thing or that particular thing. So ultimately, I think that our opportunity in constructing social realities is whether or not they nourish and sustain our entire economy of relationships that give us a place to belong and function in the world. And sometimes they're used for the exact opposite. They're used to exclude certain people or keep them impoverished while others are exaggeratedly wealthy and all of that sort of stuff. And that's the wiggle room that we have, but it's also our opportunity. And I think recognizing how our values play into that maybe is an important factor. I'm just guessing and speculating.
I think the problem is that a lot of our social interactions, our social conventions, our social beliefs are so entwined with many different aspects of a religion, for the most part, that it makes them very hard to separate. I don't know, Helena, what do you think? Is that, like, we get a lot of things we do day to day as a society from a religious cue of some sort?
We get a lot of things we do as a society from a religious cue.
Okay, well, think about
maybe we do. If we do, it's going without my awareness, right?
Okay, well, let me try and rephrase it then.
Okay.
As societies, we don't live like, say, the Romans used to live, where their society was all about power, and their religions were built around power structures. What we evolved into in the Western society is a more it's, how do I explain this? We have a way of looking at the world, and we do things that you could almost say are, as a society, that are quasi-religious. We don't go around killing people, yet the religious people have co-opted "thou shalt not murder." We don't go around beating people up for no reason, but the religious will say, "Well, that's because God gave you this moral." You know what I'm saying? Like, we've built social constructs around what religion. The whole marriage thing is probably a better idea. People have been getting married and having kids on many levels for thousands and thousands of years. The religious people have co-opted that and said it's a sanctity. The churches, it became institutionalized in the Middle Ages, whatever. So now, when you talk about people wanting to get married, even if they're not religious, they feel they have to do it in a church. And I know many people who aren't religious that get married in a church for many reasons, but a lot of it is because their families are religious and they feel that they have to show their respect to that religiosity in that group setting, whether they believe it or not, whether they ever intend to go or not. They feel compelled because socially that's what we do. Does that make more sense, kind of what I'm talking about?
Well, yes, I think that's definitely goes on. Now, let's see. Would everyone agreeing to my way of thinking that I guess physical facts should be like supreme as far as existence is concerned? Mm-hmm. Would that do anything to help the situation that you brought up? Who knows? Probably not. I don't know.
It's like I said, it's really tough to detach the physical from the existential in our culture, because we've been brought up in many ways to treat the metaphysical as a reality.
Yeah, and so I think that this argument that because collective intentionality exists, it's a way we do things. It's the way we think about things. Therefore, we should just go ahead and maybe call those things existence, that they exist in the same way as physical facts exist.
Malleable
to
facts
me,
versus immutable facts, or maybe something like that.
yeah, maybe.
And this is like Ozzy was saying. This is my contention with philosophy. I don't see it as having any relevance in the natural world, because it's all
but
just...
you think you don't, but you're talking about it right now.
I understand that, but when you're talking about classical this and that, I don't need to know all of that to have a philosophical discussion. Whatever you want to define me as philosophically means nothing to me, because I don't care. This is how I think. This is what I believe. So you can tell me I'm something, but it's going to mean nothing to me. Right. Ask me what I believe.
Right. So you see labeling yourself as such and such philosophical bent as putting you in a box, rather than as sort of making it a little bit more clear.
Yeah, exactly, because I don't know what those boxes mean.
Right, but if you navigated those linguistic headwinds to understand how they relate to the world, they might enable you to be able to position yourself either more solidly in what you believe, or recognize that maybe you have some more questioning to do in certain areas. And I think that perhaps that's what the people that are educated in that whole jargon linguistic thing that surrounds philosophy are able to do. In other words, you can't see from their perspective because you don't have the lens, but they see from their perspective that what they hold is of value. I do agree that making it transmittable is of great value from my perspective, and not having to have the entry cost of learning these words like ontological and epistemological and so on is probably of value, because common people would gain from having an understanding of some of the basic philosophical tenets. Yeah.
For me, I see a lot of those people who use those terms, not like Ozzy doesn't use those terms when he's talking to people like me, because he knows they don't mean anything to me. But tell me what you mean, and I can understand it. But a lot of people in our community use them as, well, you're not smart enough to talk to me. And that bothers me. Like, I might not know what these terms mean, but let's have a discussion, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking and how I think about things and how I see. You can tell me like, this is what I am. That's fine, but let's have a discussion. Like, don't stop the conversation because I can't live in your world, and that happens far too often.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think the problem is as follows. There's a gaggle of Tartophyllus esophageal stridulations with an aromatic hydrocarbon blend of bilabial friction.
Yeah, precisely. You're talking about a bunch of blowhards.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Right. Of course.
Oh.
All right, so I'm just going to glance at those questions real quick. I'll be right back.
Yes.
Okay. And we do have a 1 o'clock here.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Who is it with? You tell me.
I have to look it up on my calendar. Let me check back with you momentarily.
Yeah, it's okay. You can edit this out later, right?
Yeah. So Lyrical is today.
Yeah.
And Tanya is Saturday, 7 p.m.
Tomorrow, yes. And Dave is in the morning on Sunday.
Dave is 10 a.m. in the morning on Sunday for me.
Yes.
What are you guys talking about?
We're having conversations with Dave Guard and Lyrical and Tanya on this topic. So, and then Joe is going to kind of put it all together into this
Yeah, we're trying to craft something that will be useful for somebody who to understand what beliefs are, and a few stories about people who have transitioned from one significantly different set of beliefs to another, what that process looked like, what their world was like in the one aspect, what their world was like in the other aspect, and what the transformational process looked like. So all together, we're trying to put together something that will be useful for people to watch in order to just get a teaser on not only what beliefs are, but how we go through transformation processes.
So you're going to ask each person the questions that you listed here?
Yes, pretty much.
Well, I want to get in on that.
Of course you do.
Well, of course. Okay.
Well, interview me for crying out loud.
Well, why don't we do that right now?
Well, okay, well.
Do you have time?
Might be better if I could read the questions first, but what the heck? Okay.
Why don't we try it? And if you don't like this take, we can do another take. How's that?
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. So let me get down past
I haven't found the questions. And I haven't found the questions yet, so I don't even know really what this is all about.
Helena, I put them in Skype, and I put them in the chat that you and I were having on Hangouts.
Yeah, I know. I copy-pasted them. I just have to...
You said you put them in OneNote.
OneNote. Oh, here they are. Okay.
Yeah, aren't you glad I'm Asperger's?
Am I ever? Okay, although the meaning of... I'm going to read it. Is it okay if I read them all real quick?
Yeah, we can do that quick. We are going to have to move on to lyrical at 1.
Yeah, we still got we've got
45 minutes.
So.
Yeah, that's plenty.
All right, so I'll just read them out loud real quick.
And the thing about this, Helena, is the stuff that you and I and Joe were just talking about. Yeah. We can put that into another Hangout. That's a whole other topic, right?
Right.
So that's the beauty of doing stuff like this and having a wizard on the editing tool like Joe over there.
Yeah, he's going to have to teach me. I need to learn some basic editing, Joe.
I will be happy.
Can I use Movie Maker, whatever the thing is?
Yes, you can.
Okay, good.
Yes,
all right, so let's see.
I will be limited in explaining. I can explain basic principles to you, but I can't tell you to move your mouse here and click there unless you use the same program I do. So,
all right.
Yeah. All right. Which I use one that isn't all that expensive. But
what do you use?
I use something called Power Director. I used to use Adobe Premiere, but they got too salty in terms of price for what I needed in terms of what I do. So I ultimately went to Power Director, which is a lower powered one, but has plenty of depth and breadth. You can integrate music, you can create multi-tracks, you can create transitions, you can integrate music, and they have all kinds of things that they throw in with the package. So.
Okay, so I'll need to get with you later.
Number 1.
All right, 1. Okay, 1. Although the meaning of words change over time from person to person, in simple terms, what is belief? Is it a state of mind?
No, those are Aussie questions.
Okay, well, where are the other questions?
Yeah, so we get you have the Aussie.
Oh, those other questions. Yeah. I know which ones you're talking about.
So let me pull up the actual list here.
Yeah, there's another set. Those were the Aussie.
These are good ones.
They are, and he got through most of them.
If so, can you illustrate the difference? Is it appropriate to call non-empirical forms of belief faith and empirical forms belief? No.
Good question, eh?
I think no. What are social and experiential implications of empirical versus non-empirical forms of belief are on our experience? Yeah, well, that depends on C.
Yeah.
All right. You got them yet?
I don't. I'm struggling because I was in the middle of ready to copy and paste them, but then our Hangout started, so I deleted.
Let me go back. I'm sure I'll run down my timeline and I'll find them.
I'm just looking for why don't you look for the thing that you were mentioned in? Because I mentioned you I posted the questions to Lyrical, and then mentioned you. So why don't you just go to your mentioned thing on your?
Yeah, well, I'll scroll.
Okay. I need them back because I deleted them.
Attaboy.
Nice.
So, does anyone think that belief is not a state of mind in which we think something to be the case?
Say that again.
I can see
Yes.
it going.
Yes, I do think that it is not that in some cases. In most cases, we would think that, and if challenged, we would defend that. But in some cases, we're not aware of the underpinnings of why we hold a particular belief, and we can't really pinpoint it. It's just like we have thin, clumsy words for our feelings that don't actually cover the repertoire of emotional states that go on inside of our human biological frame. And so language is like trying to pop a basketball with a wet noodle. It's just, it only has so much carrying capacity, and it really doesn't describe our reality
That's so
complete
true.
precise terms. So with that being said, I think beliefs are of the same nature, that they actually do have a presence in our mind, but for reasons which we may not understand. And that we would defend them with our abstractions, with our verbal abstractions, in ways that are predicated on something that we could feel are okay in our terms to defend, but aren't really sufficient.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I found them.
Okay, great.
Where do you want me to post them, Helen? I'm posting them here for Joe. Where do you want
I
them?
guess post them in the side chat, and I'll just read
There
them out
they
loud.
are.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So I don't know. I don't like the echo I'm creating. I don't know why it's happening.
Probably Joe.
It could be me, but since I don't get an echo, the live broadcast won't get an echo. So I will mute as I have asked others to do. So
Okay. So let's see. What did you originally believe? From your perspective, how did what you originally believed get seeded?
right, and you should
Identity.
understand, Helena. We're talking to people who have had a significant transformation in their belief structure, and these questions are predicated to understand that arc, that transition from one set of beliefs to a completely different one. And so, if
Right.
you haven't had that kind of a transformation process in your life, these questions might be a bit off the target, a little irrelevant.
Okay, well, let me read through them at least. Okay, from your perspective, how did what you originally believed get seeded in your identity? Do you think the reason you believed is because you were influenced by culture, environmental circumstances, as in a traumatic or inspiring event? How did this belief shape the way you saw other people, places, and things? Was there anything that made you begin to question your current beliefs before you made a change? If so, what were these things? How socially important was your belief? Were the people you related to, shared life with, looked to for guidance, etc., connected to this belief? If so, did you consider any of the social costs of changing your belief as part of the changing belief process? Yeah, I could see how this would really, really relate to Lyrical. She's going to love this hangout.
Yeah, she's really excited about doing this, for sure.
She's going to be great. Okay,
Yeah.
What did you change your beliefs from to? What sealed the deal, if anything, in the change in your beliefs? How has your life changed since you changed your belief? How has it affected your relationship with yourself? Ooh, that's interesting. And your community. How has it affected your relationship with yourself? Okay, how does it affect your people, places, and things? How has it changed your behaviors? Would you say you were better off or worse off due to the change? Do you have any regrets? If there's anything you could do to get the people that once shared your old beliefs to know that you now believe would be of value to them, but that they cannot see through their current belief system, what would that be, and why do you think it's valuable? So I can kind of relate. So I'm just thinking, do I have anything that might apply? Well, maybe. So my dad was a brain researcher.
Are you going into? Can we ask the questions? And the reason I ask that is because we're going to stitch together different people, with the individual questions. We're going to encapsulate, maybe thread through you and Lyrical and etc. In terms of the first question, second question, third question.
And we have the Galaxy as well.
Yeah, I don't think it'll work for that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So then, how about if we
let me just add. So here's the thing I was thinking of trying to apply these questions to. So, my dad was a brain researcher, basic brain research, and I grew up. He was in the middle of a fight with kind of, I guess, the nurture people at the university, right? So they wanted to go towards nurture, and it threatened his job, and he just suddenly explosively became this everything is nature ideologue. right when I was in my, I guess you could say, formative years. So I did kind of grow up with an assumption that everything is nature. And I did change that belief, and not only changed it, but changed it drastically as my life progressed.
Okay, that's perfect. That fits exactly this model, and I would prefer to have one of these kind of examples as opposed to strictly one that went from theology to theist to non-theist or whatever. So, you know, from my perspective, what you're talking about is a real gem. So if you wouldn't mind going through the process, that would be.
Let's go through it. Okay. I will give you my off-the-cuff remarks. They probably wouldn't be as good if I sat around for a while, but let's do it.
All right. So, well, they'll have an emotional impact that if you staled them up with abstractions over time, that.
Yeah, but I need my excuses.
Well, that's true. Okay.
All right, go.
Of course we do.
Right. So Helena, you grew up believing a certain thing about nature and nurture. What was that?
So I grew up believing that practically everything, if not everything, was nature.
Why did you believe that? What was the foundation for that?
The foundation for that was my parental upbringing. So my dad strongly held to that, to the point that there were political reasons for him to insist. So that's sort of what I grew up thinking must be the case.
So you think that the primary reason for your belief structure at that time was influenced by your direct environmental circumstances, your dad's influence and all of that, or there was...
Interestingly, yes. I absolutely think that's what caused it.
How did that belief shape the way you saw people, places, and let me clear my throat and ask that question again. How did that belief system shape the way you saw people, places, and things?
Let's see. So, for one thing, it must have meant that people aren't changeable, that people are sort of fixed, and that they're fixed because of their genetics. So it closed a lot of doors in terms of not only my view of people, but my view of myself in terms of could I change, how could I change, could I have control over change, and that kind of thing.
What was it that made you start questioning that belief? I'm assuming that it has transitioned. So what was it that caused you to start questioning what it is that your beliefs were founded on?
So it's going to be hard to pinpoint exactly, as it always is, right? So if I have to construct a narrative, I'm going to pull sort of what memories pop out right now. And so I guess the first memories were sort of things that he said that were based on his philosophy that everything must be nature that didn't sit with me. So stereotypical kinds of remarks that were probably more political in nature, but when I was young, I didn't know that. So I assumed that he assumed that those people are that way, and it doesn't matter what group you're talking about, because of their genetics. And then if I think of sort of episodics, the big one for me was we had a little dog, and my mother was trying to train this dog, and it was so obvious to me, even as a young kid, that the stuff she was doing was just so stupid and not effective, and she didn't seem to be watching the dog to see how he was responding to what she was doing, and I would hear the two of them have arguments over it, and his responses just seemed ludicrous. Like, you know, you'll never do that. He'll never do that. He's a dog. Dogs can't X, right? So then I went to the library and got a dog training book, and it sort of opened my eyes a lot. And that sort of is what started me on the path to animal training in general. But that was sort of the crux of it, I think. I saw that it wasn't true, even with this dog.
So a little bit of B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning stuff that's woven into dog training books that got you to thinking something different was afoot, yes?
I guess you could say that, yeah.
Well, how did that affect your relationship? Because, I mean, in this particular case, what I find interesting is that your dad, as an authority figure, as someone that I'm sure you look to for guidance and parental influences are obviously connected to at least our initial formations of belief. How did that affect the relationship between you and your dad, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so he's actually a very open guy, and interested in talking and interested in hearing different theories and things like that. And so maybe he was just professing, who knows? But so I could come to him with my questions and stuff like that, and he would sit and really talk about it and things like that. So he was willing to talk about it, but he always closed the door at the end. And he would try to reinterpret something I would bring up so that it had to be nature. And he would bring in multiple examples of obvious nature things, eye color and stuff like that. And so I'd say he appeared open, but probably wasn't, and maybe rightfully so because I was little. And then as I got older and I started to see him continuing to think that way, or perhaps think that way, in social circumstances, then I started to really challenge him. And then he appeared to back down. Now, since then, he has been influenced by other people, and I think he really has sort of changed his opinion on this a little bit. But I have changed my opinion on it a huge amount. A huge amount. I think we're way more flexible and adaptable and changeable than we ever previously thought.
So you think there's a plasticity to human experience where he felt like it was fixed and predetermined? And would you say, okay, well, first of all, let me ask you, is that characterization correct or incorrect?
I think it's correct.
Okay, so did you fold in a nurture component into nature and say that, well, there are some fixed things, there are also some malleable points, some plastic points that we can actually shape and change our behaviors by? And so now you have something that is built on top of that, maybe nature platform that incorporates nurture. Would that be how you characterize your current belief?
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good characterization. I mean, clearly some things are genetic, right? Like you can't do any behavioral thing to change your eye color. Just, as a stupid example.
Well, not just yet, but yeah.
Not just yet. Who knows, right? And that's the other thing, is who really does know? Who knows? Maybe we could. But, I think I'm even more extreme the other way, because I've had experiences that have shown me that things that even so-called reasonable people on the nature-nurture question believe are nature. In fact, even those things can really, really be changed and helped and modified from a changing of the external environment.
Well, I think from when I was growing up, I think of how far we've come in an understanding of this whole discussion. It's absolutely crazy that, like, I grew up the same as your dad, thinking it was all, you are just the way you are, and there wasn't anything outside of that ability, and then all of a sudden well, I can start thinking differently. There's got to be more to it.
Right. So
science is confirming all these things as we get through it here. It's amazing, actually.
So a good example is the fusiform gyrus is a really good example for me to sort of explain this. So you can do behavioral things to activate the fusiform gyrus where otherwise it wasn't being activated, and that is clear, absolute, without question.
Can you help? Somebody watching this might not know that the fusiform gyrus is the center of the brain that is recognized as being processing facial recognition primarily. But Is that
Right. So there were two competing theories. The first one was that that's the special module, if you will, in our brain that that processes faces, right? And that was based on the fact that you do like EEGs, and I think even some fMRIs now show that. And when neurotypical people look at faces, that's the part that lights up, right? And there was a competing theory that it's not really like that. It's more kind of an expert area. So that if you become an expert at discrimination, fine discriminations, you will use that part of your brain to do that. So, and so when you have people with autism who don't recognize faces, and you run them through an EEG or even an fMRI, perhaps, although I didn't ever do that, I just used the EEGs, you can see that when they look at faces, that part is not, if you will, lighting up, just to make things easy, right? So they will recognize faces, but other parts of the brain, quote unquote, light up. So they're sort of analyzing faces using the same kinds of parts of the brain that analyze objects, right? So they're not doing it with their fusiform gyrus. However, it's not true that they just have a latent fusiform gyrus. The fusiform gyrus, in fact, does light up if you give them other kinds of visual discrimination tasks, right? And so they first discovered this by actually, funnily enough, talking to dog experts and giving them like upside-down pictures of dogs and things like that, and they noticed that. So now there are routine activities that you can do with people whose fusiform gyrus isn't lighting up when they look at faces to get it active when applied to faces. So to me, that would be a really good example of a nature-nurture kind of distinction where I would be more on the nurture side than I ever thought I ever could be.
excellent? So if you could characterize for us what about your life has changed since you changed that belief. In other words, how does it affect your relationship with yourself, with your community? How does it affect the way that you see people, places, and things?
So I think it's hard to know if that one particular change, just the nature-nurture question, is what has made the biggest change in me, or if it's more having experience with someone with autism has made the bigger change. But they must be related. But for sure, it has made me way more compassionate. It has made me way more understanding, way more sympathetic, and able to, like, if I see like a scene in the grocery store, where ordinarily I would have thought, I'll never be that kind of mom. I'll never let my kid do that. You know, that kind of thing. Those sorts of judgmental sort of things that spark in your mind, they don't happen anymore. So it's really changed me in terms of compassion and understanding to other people.
So would it be fair to characterize what you're saying here is that you have changed your mindset from seeing people as these accountable, responsible creatures to perhaps if they have some destructive behavior and or some kind of a destructive aspect of their personality, that might be more governed by what could be characterized as a wound or a particular starvation in their nourishment process, their developmental process, as opposed to, let's say, a crime that needs punished because people are accountable.
I think that's probably true. I'm not sure that's exactly what I was getting at, but I definitely do think that that's probably true.
Yeah, you had said that you now have more compassion. So what do you see when you see the woman who is yelling at their child? What do you think it is that contributed to the woman's belief structure or whatever that had her doing something which I am guessing you felt is a destructive behavior? Yeah,
so see, I can probably switch that. The particular examples I was thinking of are sort of more geared towards what the kid is doing. So, like, the kid's at the impulse aisle, and the kid keeps, groaning and moaning and carrying on about the candy bar they want, and the mother is responding negative, 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 negative. And I see that. Originally, I would have gone, would have thought something like, I'm going to make sure I'm not that kind of mom, right? So that means, that's really not a nature. That's all a nurture thing.
That's a judgment.
Yeah. So I would have thoughts like, I'm going to always be consistent, and friendly to my kid. Those kinds of thoughts, right? So it's really not this nature nurture. But now I have nothing like that. I am only filled with compassion for both parties, and sort of like a feeling of a fuller understanding. So rather than consider flashing a dirty look to the mom because she's not teaching her kid right, instead I have a broader sort of feeling of compassion is the only thing I can think of. I can see that both people are struggling. In terms of the nature-nurture thing, it might be more like people with disabilities don't frighten me at all. And I think that fear is sort of one of the major things, fear of the unknown, fear of the other, that confronts people with severe disabilities, whether they're obviously recognizable or not. That just has disappeared for me. And I think it has something to do with not so much it must be nature versus nurture, but more that the two are combined. And so there's no reason to feel otherness towards others. Probably not explaining that very well, but
well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think you hit the target dead on, in fact. So if there's anything you could get people that once shared your belief to know that they can't see because they're looking through a nature lens only, what would that be? Why is it of value?
So I think it's of value perhaps because it does help you to not other people so easily. If you decide somewhere deep in some nebulous part of your bones that person is the way they are, because that is the way they are, then it's much easier to just either dismiss them or target negative things at them, that kind of thing. Whereas if you realize that people are a product of both their genetics and their environment, you realize, there but for the grace of God go I kind of a thing, and that's, I think, where it comes from. It's not like that homeless person, something's wrong with him. It's like, that could be me. It just so easily, like, 2 paychecks, and that's me. And that I think really does relate in some kind of way to the nature nurture, because if you do realize the nurture component, then you realize that there's nothing different about the person in a bad situation or in a bad circumstance. It could be anyone. It's not to do with something that is fundamentally different or wrong about them necessarily.
Yeah, can I
go ahead?
Can I ask if I'm understanding you correctly too? Something else that would emerge out of the nurture equation too is that rather than be painted, you can now become a painter to some degree. So you can actually learn the skills to begin to shape your own self through nurture as well. And that, to me, has an underlying foundation of hope and intentionality that you could begin to craft your life a little bit. Is that a fair statement about what you're sort of characterizing in terms of the value of entering nurture into the equation?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously absolutely true. So if you want to do a self-improvement program, it's not like the way to do that is to sit there and will that you were better, right? And just will even harder that you were better. In fact, there are well-known and easy things that you can do to help yourself improve, and they work, and they're relatively easy to do, and so it does give a path, right? So if you do a gap analysis on yourself, and or you've got a higher self, or any of those mystical ideas, and you want to reach your higher self, or any of that kind of thing. Well, I, by the way, have some techniques that you could do that could really get you over there to the higher self, right? And that is part of that, because if you just think it's all nurture, And so you sit around wishing you were better or convincing yourself to be better, and you have no way to get any better. That's gonna, plague you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know for me, I mean, if I was just the way I was, I could never have changed because I would have been stuck there. So if there's no plasticity, then we are set in stone, and why do we even bother, right?
That's right, and that can really get you down. So if you're a person if you're a nature person and you want to self-improve, you are digging yourself into a pretty tough hole because your only thing is to just want to be better and also to really beat yourself up about not having been better, right?
So, James, can you help people that are listening that might not know what is it in particular about your own cognitive abilities that you found challenging? I think you might be referring to maybe a little bit on the autism spectrum, or.
Well, that's a part of it. For me, I grew up very religious my entire life. That led to a whole lot of other issues that I wasn't aware of until I started coming out of that lifestyle. I was always told that, we have a sin nature, which is a real religious term. So there's that nature-nurture thing, right? So when you start from that premise, and I talk to this with people all the time who struggle with coming out of the religious part of life, they still feel wicked and evil because it's been so ingrained into them. I said, well, there's a better way. There's another way. So for me, once I left the religious paradigm, I had to literally retrain my thinking processes. And I've talked to Helen about some of my history, and I had to restart from ground zero and think differently about who I am, how I see myself, and how I want to interact with the world. So all of those things, and in the midst of all that, I came to realize that I fall smack dab squarely 100% in the autism spectrum. Being defined as Asperger's made complete sense to my entire life. Having that knowledge allowed me to understand how my brain functions, and that allowed the cognitive therapy that I went through to take hold, because I understood that it would work. And had I not been able to see hope that my brain can change, I can have input into what my brain understands and how I think and how I feel, life I wouldn't be here. Let's just put it that way.
It's very interesting because my mother is religious, and she sees my sort of life trajectory. I see it as me fumbling around, not knowing what I want to do. She sees it as God building me so that I could do this job that I'm doing now. Because I started with animals, and I moved from easy to handle domesticated animals to difficult to handle animals that you have to convince to even interact with you because there's a big, huge barrier, right? And so I already sort of believed, if you will, that even the most behavioristic of techniques, right, not involving cognition or beliefs, but sort of the sort of blanket behavior techniques, I already had sort of evidence that those things were effective. And so I didn't have to first change my whole belief set in order to apply some things to my job now. So it allowed me as the parent to already have the hope. And a lot of times what stops parents and educators and sometimes therapists, but mostly it's parents and the educators, is this lack of hope, which I think stems from this nature thing. That, there's no point in doing anything. There's no point in doing anything. There will be no improvement. They are how they are, and I'm just screwed as the parent.
Yep.
And right?
Yeah, that's how we grew up. I mean, you look at the school systems today up here. Everybody, every kid that's a little out of hand is put on Ritalin. It's like they don't want to deal with the fact that the kid, has a bit of a, for me, I was bored stiff in school because I knew all this stuff already.
Yeah, and so of course Asperger's is very different, right? Very, very different. Yeah.
So, but they wanted to. How they dealt with me was they put me in charge of the audiovisual equipment. They put me in charge of repairing the photocopying machine. They got me out doing things to get me out of the classroom because I was just bored.
That's great.
Yeah, well, that helped me.
Yeah.
Because they knew I knew this stuff. They would bring me back in to write the tests, and I'd, fly through the tests. But they didn't have the awareness that, this guy could be doing this instead of this. They didn't know how to challenge me in that sense because there wasn't an awareness. And now we have a society in the school systems where the first thing they want to do is put the kids on drugs. Oh, he's ADD, put him on drugs. That's all they want to do rather than deal with the fact that, so they've given up that whole nurture part and they're relying on chemicals to control the nature part.
Right, because it gives a better outcome. That's just a matter of they don't have the funding, they don't have enough people, they don't have the But as far as beliefs go, I think it's interesting how if you look at my mom who's looking at my, I guess, life journey, I hate that word, but right, she sees life as a journey. She's a journey type. She's not extreme journey type, but she's very religious. So she has a view of what my life was like that is so different. Like she sees it as there's a common thread, and that thread is theological, right? God was preparing me all this time. Whereas I see that I was just floundering around, not being able to pick a career.
Do you have any regrets because of the transition that you've made from strictly and primarily nature point of view to one that is now embracing both nature and nurture? Has there been any downsides? If so, what are they? And what would you say is the greatest benefit of that?
I can't say there have been any downsides to that one in particular. But I could just be blind. There probably are lots of downsides. I haven't considered that yet. And then the compassion thing, I think, would probably be the greatest benefit that I've noticed.
Yeah, I would say that's a big one too, but of course it's a value judgment.
Right. It hasn't helped me at all sort of reconcile the floundering. I still think I was just floundering. But, so maybe there is an advantage to having a belief system in which you can fit the empirical evidence, right? Yes. So for my mother, who has this belief system, she can fit my floundering around and jumping from career to career till I found one that I felt was appropriate and that I could, that was flexible enough and challenging enough and all that, right? For her, she fits those pieces into her already established kind of narrative, and it works real well for her, and she's very satisfied. I don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I also think that much like there are some cells in our body that are just, if you're born in the middle of a kidney, you know that you're a kidney cell and that you operate this way and that, but then there are some like the B cells in our immune system that adapt and float around the whole body looking for purpose all the time. And I think that a lot, culturally speaking, that some of us follow those same formats in the terms of it can be more difficult for us to find our purpose until we've found that confirmation, that thing that clicks.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess maybe downfalls could be if you go too far toward nurture, then you might work on things that it's just clear can't change. So that could be a downfall, right? So you could have, in my field, you can have super hopeful parents who think, whose only regret is that they didn't start soon enough, and that kind of thing. And so you don't want to just kick nature out, because surely it's a very strong component. So there could be downfalls of going too far towards nurturing, that you just think you could fix everything, and then there's a matter of not accepting sort of where you are and who you are, and you know, finding ways to cope with that.
Yeah, well, I do appreciate you sharing the whole gambit of how you made a transition and what it's meant to you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you. I am okay. So Lyrical, I'm going to send an invite to her here shortly, but I'm just trying to process what you've said. It's really, you know, it's real. No, you don't have to leave it all now. I'm just thinking to myself, wow, that's a good one. I'm not sure if that'll even. I'm not sure if it will add to the message or subtract, but on its own merit, you know, my initial impression is that that's a really good framework to understand a belief transition in and of itself, just on as a standalone. So anyway, I'm thinking out loud here.
Yeah, well, you know, if we have time to muse, it was very interesting, because I grew up in a very strange environment by all accounts, right? Like I would go to the lab, and when I was an early teen, I cut rat brain sections, but also I would see how they would treat the monkeys, and you know, it was very full, and this nurture-nature question was kind of always sort of there in the background.
You ever heard of Fauna Sanctuary?
Fauna? No.
Fauna Sanctuary. There's a place just outside of Montreal that used to take the gorillas that were used for testing, and they used to. It's called Fauna Sanctuary. I've got the book. It's stunning what these people did to these animals, and you might be interested if you grew up in that environment.
Yeah, I have a really strong memory. You know, gut-wrenching, heartbreaking type memory.
Yeah. Well, I read this
my dad
book,
and what he did to my favorite rhesus monkey right in front of me without any thought in the matter. So
it's just nature, honey. Don't worry about it.
That's right. That's kind of the idea. That's what he's for. Why did you get attached? Well, you let me get it. You didn't tell me. You know.
The Chimps of Fauna Sanctuary, it's called, by Andrew Westall. West, O-L-L is his last name.
Okay.
I've got the book here, but yeah, it's still in operation. It's just outside of Montreal.
Interesting. So yeah, I worked at a lot of sanctuary type things where a lot of the animals were, not a lot, but some of them were you know, rescues from labs. Well, the lab didn't want use of them anymore, and they, rather than kill them, they brought them to the sanctuary.
Yeah. I know we've been talking about beliefs here today, but I too wonder if there isn't something in the future that we might do well to discuss in terms of the abstract lens that we use to see is not, you know, is not necessarily totally characterized by this thing we call belief. So, for instance, I think that religions, if you take an anthropological perspective, like a Marvin Harris kind of a thing to it, you would say, okay, the reason that a particular culture believes this set of beliefs is just a way for them to linguistically house what is necessary for them to be able to function in the context of their environment. So if you live in an environment where eating pigs would be deleterious because there isn't much food source, they eat the same things you do and they don't keep well, and you don't have any such things as refrigeration, pigs are bad. Or if you kill the cow, then you're not going to have that workhorse, so to speak, you know, the plow for next year's planting, and therefore the famine that you're experiencing right now will be even worse. Therefore, cows are sacred, kind of an approach to things, and that I think that there might be some sort of a way to explain this better using words, but that our beliefs kind of sometimes hinge on some sort of pragmatic matrix, and they themselves are just placeholders for some other deeper thing which we don't quite understand on the surface. So, I just think maybe there's future fodder for what is the nature of language, and what does it afford us, and can it be as much a thing that blocks our vision as much as enables it, and what's the difference between those things?
Oh yeah, I would love to have a discussion about that. So that's a really interesting idea.
These are the kind of things that I'm thinking, these are kind of conversations I'd really love to have, and you can't have them in the midst of a room that is constipated and obsessively focused on a single subject that is tantamount to deciding what kind of sprinkles to put on the cupcake while the cooking's on top. We got some important stuff to talk about. You just can't have, in the midst of that.
Joe, could you send Lyrical the link? She's ready to go.
I did. I sent her an invitation as well as. Oh, wait. I think she responded out here. She said, "Okay, sounds good." So she did receive it.
Okay. So I will let you guys go.
No? You're
Yeah,
welcome to stay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just don't want to. Okay, so I'll stay a little. I'll stick around a little bit.
Yeah, and feel free to bail out whenever.
Okay.
I sent you that link in the external chat. I put it in our little message thing on Hangout as well.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's just these are the chimps that they've got rescued there right now.
I'll go check that out. Chimps are huge. It's amazing how huge they are. You don't think they're that big.
Well, I know they can snap your hand in a minute.
Yeah, they're a lot bigger than you think, because everybody always sees the baby chimps.
Well, they see the baby ones, but they don't see the 200-pound ones.
Yeah, I mean, chimps are huge. When I worked with chimps, I was like, wait, are you sure these are chimps?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll check it out.
98 to 99% of our DNA. All right, we're just waiting for
the devil is in the details, isn't it?
It's that 1%.
So are the angels. Yeah. Yeah. I think our capacity to do things is part a fluke of also the environmental circumstance we were exposed to too. So we just happen to have these hands because we had to swing from trees, etc., and we have the cognitive function, and that combination, the same way that sodium chloride is quite a bit different than sodium or chloride, that the combination affords a spread of capacities that are not necessarily inherent in those separate things, that dolphins may be in fact more intelligent than us, but
I think
their physiology, they've never been able to experience and do some of the things that these things have.
It's so funny, because I think about that all the time. I don't know about that. I think if our brains were in dolphins' bodies, we would still have all kinds of cool tools. They wouldn't depend on our thumb, right? They would be like huge and maybe lever type systems or something where you could like put your whole body on it and let the force of the water pull you down. But but I'm not so. I don't know.
You want to know?
I don't think it really comes down to thumbs and hands.
You know what I think?
Okay,
I think that we are the only animal on the planet trying to destroy it, so therefore we can't possibly be the smartest animal around.
But
you're describing pathology.
We are trying to destroy it. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, we are.
I was just going to say, James, that that's a particularly craven view of the world. Maybe accurate, but craven. So, but I also think that we humans are infantile. That our cognitive faculties are comparative to a light-sensitive patch on an amoeba is to the eye. That we're just very, very at the beginning stages of being able to parse fact from fiction. Hi, Lyrical.
Yeah, I'm not sure all this folding is such a good thing. I mean, so it produces self-awareness. Well, is that good? I don't know.
Yeah, I posted the link in Skype to Helena. So it's all over the place for you.
Yeah, so we're just on the backside of having. I went through the same questions with Helena that we're going to go through with you, and then later on we're going to stitch these things all together. And I think we already talked about this, so it's probably old news. Are you muted?
No, I'm good. Can you hear me? All right. We're good. Sounds great. All right. Yeah.
So at any time we're ready to like roll down through the questions. And do you feel like you're ready, or do you want any?
You know, let's just dive in, I guess.
Okay. All right. All right. So we have here with us today Lyrical Orion, who has had a significant change in her belief structures. And so, Lyrical, can you help us understand what is it that you originally believed?
Sure. I was raised in the Mormon faith. So I believed a Christian philosophy to a certain extent, and also the Mormon essence that goes along with that, which was basically, that Jesus was the Savior, that Joseph Smith was a prophet, that there were living prophets on earth, and a very structured belief system that kind of went along with it for up until about my 21st year of life.
So from your perspective, how did what you originally believed, get seated in your identity, so to speak? Was it because of your family? You used the word raised. Is that what you think the primary driver was for the reason that you believe that existing belief structure?
Yeah, definitely. I literally was, I was raised in the church to such an extent that my parents had been sealed in the temple. I was, quote unquote, born under the covenant, which means that that all of my family members before I was born were members of the church as well. It was such an important aspect to the family's life and my life that I didn't know much of anything else until I learned about other religions when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I started learning about other types of religions. But I went to church every Sunday. But the Mormon church, if you're familiar with some of the things that they do, you go to church every day to some extent. You're doing activities. You're doing some type of, something structured at the church almost on a daily basis. And so it was very important. And also, my family had a little bit of a legacy in it, so I remember just talking with my grandma about how her grandmother, I guess it would have been her grandmother, was, part of the beginnings of the church, so there was a lot of legacy there and pride, I guess you would say, in it.
So how did it shape, would you say, the way that you saw people, places, and things? Did it frame everything, including both the things within the church and the things outside of the church? And if so, what did that mean?
Excuse me, I believed it to be very true because I didn't have a reason to doubt it. And so I believed that everything was for God's kingdom, that the earth was here, so that we could progress the living church, and that every single action was for that purpose, and so that's a pretty focused mindset. And it stayed that way, and it wasn't active. I mean, I believed it as a child, and then as a young adult and as a teenager, we actually did missionary work and things like that.
So was there anything that you can identify that really began this questioning process of your existing belief? If so, what were those things?
Yes, there was definitely something that started the entire questioning process. I think that even I always questioned things within the church. I would ask questions about certain things. Why did Joseph Smith say this? And I'd ask my priesthood holders these types of questions, but I never doubted. I was just interested and curious. But what really sparked the beginning of the change was that I had started going to massage therapy school, and as soon as I got enrolled in the school, I could see the furrowed eyebrows of my, of the brothers and sisters that I was with, that they were sort of thinking, that's not the right career path. That's not something a righteous person really does. And I thought, oh, they're being too strict, you know. They're not understanding that even though some people maybe take that one way, I'm not going to be taking it that way. You know, it's just you know, this and that. And I was just curious as to why they were so apprehensive about the whole idea of me going to massage therapy school. And I went, and then there was the I guess you would say the foundation was sort of being laid within my mind of different ideas, you know, because even up to that point, I was about 19 years old. Even up to that point, I had never read about any other religions. I didn't know anything about Buddhism or Hinduism, and I was even taught to look into those types of things was meant that you were being led by the devil, you know. And so you really just stayed away from even being too curious about stuff. And so I'd go to massage therapy school. I was the only Mormon there. I was the only Mormon in a lot of situations, but I remember, you know, talking to them about certain things, about how, you know, you can be in the world but not of the world. I remember saying that, and they were never judgmental to me, and they never said anything negative to me about my religion, but would just give me, you know, kind of a smile and a pat on the back, you know, and just, you know, just good for you, you know. And but at the same time, it made me start thinking about, you know, laying a foundation that I didn't even realize I was laying yet, which was basically sort of expanding my knowledge base, expanding just to a little bit more of the world around me, and ideas and philosophies and things like that.
Yeah, so you sounded like you were saying that as you began to discover these other things, you were receiving the furrowed brow treatment and all of that. So from that, I take it that it was pretty socially important, your belief structure. It was hinged on a very core social network of people that you related to, shared life with, looked to for guidance and all of that. So did you have any consideration for the social cost of changing your belief when you began questioning? Was that part of the equation that helped you weigh things into balance? And if so, what was that?
Well, let me just, you know, in case you don't know, when Mormons are, every ward, it's called a ward, and it's basically, it's a church, you know, it's where you go to church, and it's called your ward, and we don't call it a ward, we call it a ward family. You know, and so these people were considered, and you call them your brothers and sisters, these people were like family, you know, and they would come, and we were so connected to these people that being judged by them was like being judged by your family, you know. But like, I really believed it, and I was more curious about truth and more curious about what God really had put out there for us to discover, you know, and these types of questions, that I wasn't thinking about what I was going to be losing at all. Even though, you know, nowadays I would say that there was a lot lost as far as social interactions and things like that, because it was such a huge dynamic when you're involved with something like that. On a daily basis, you know, and it's not necessarily all bad. For example, they do a lot of charity work and things like that. But the interaction, I wasn't shunned. I was never shunned or anything like that. I still communicate with members of the church quite regularly on Facebook. I almost talk to them every day.
If you don't mind me asking, is shunning part of the structure of the church? Are you supposed to be shunned and people aren't shunning you, or is it just not a practice?
You're not. It's not a shunning church. From my experience, they do everything that they can to embrace a person. It's usually only if you become what's called an apostate do they actually shun you, and that is taking a very active role, speaking against the church. You know, and in that case, they consider you to be kind of an outed person.
Okay, so help us understand what it is that you change your beliefs from to. In other words, where did we understand that, and have we sufficiently covered what it is that you did believe in terms of Mormonism. Where did you go to from Mormonism?
Well, I followed kind of a progression. I wasn't like some of these wonderful people here in this community that are able to just go from belief to complete non-belief. I didn't have this type of a dynamic where I was really, I just didn't even know about atheism. Really, atheism wasn't a word in my dictionary. I really just, my personal dictionary, I really didn't even understand what it was to be an atheist at that point. The non-belief in God, to me, when I left the church, it didn't seem possible. So what I was doing when I very first left was asking Jesus in my prayers, how come you let me believe in a church that wasn't true? And it took about, I think it was, at least 6 or 8 months before I realized and was able to come to terms that Christianity probably or possibly wasn't literally true, that Jesus wasn't really a God, and all these different types of things. It took months to get to that point. And then even after I was able to shake away all of Christianity, I still was looking into other religions because I'd never been allowed to look into them before. So I started looking into Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and that went in a lot with, with studying massage therapy, because a lot of it has to do with Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine and different things like that. So I was curious about the religious philosophies that had started those types of things. And but I never thought that no religion was possible. For quite a while, I was still questioning about which one do I want to be a Buddhist? What do I want to do? And even up until I came into the community, this community about 4 years ago now, I really hadn't thought that atheism was something that I ever would want to embrace, because I really didn't understand it well enough, and so now I definitely agree with it.
So you're saying that you moved toward atheism. Is there anything you could identify that really sealed the deal for you? You had described a transitional process and incremental, but is there something that you can identify that really helped you cross the threshold from believing in an Abrahamic-centric religion to a non-theistic position?
Well, I definitely I had my qualms with certain religions, and I would say that this religion is definitely not true, but I understand certain qualities about that religion that were. The threshold was interesting, because what I noticed happening was that I would be branching out in my mind, questioning and looking for certain things before I was able to admit to myself that I didn't believe it anymore. So once I had laid a certain foundation in my research and looking into different ideas, then I was able to finally say, okay, this isn't true. This absolutely isn't true, because I had a different ground to fall on. So I think that, like, expanding yourself and just getting to the point where you can accept other ideas outside of that religion, outside of that philosophy, lays the groundwork for you to be able to eventually say enough.
Well, how has your life changed since that shift in belief? And well, let me ask a question before that. So this belief sounds like it was not a voluntary process necessarily, although you did pursue things once you started questioning. You were feeding some inherent explorative search hunger that you had within yourself, and then you found this new position called non-theism. Is that an accurate way of characterizing it?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, that being said, how has it changed your life? How has it affected your relationship with yourself, with your community?
That's a great question. How it affected the relationship with myself is beyond description, because not only are you raised to believe, in any Christian faith, how incomplete you are, how sin is such an aspect of life, how how flesh is sinful. I remember feeling how flesh is sinful. Any desire of the flesh was just so sinful, and also, I hate to bring up this point, but as a woman, also very inferior. It is just being born a woman. And when I was able to strip it all away, I started to feel like a real human being. And I'm able to live life on life's terms. I'm saying if this is all there is, if this is my life, then everything needs to be so appreciated in a different way. Not with the thought of a reward or an afterlife or anything like that, but with just living life on life's terms, because this is what there is. And I became more of a humanist. I became more of we did charity work, but it was all for God. And now I do things that are more just because I care about people. And so I became a more of an empowered person, and that was wonderful.
Well, I got to be honest with you. I'm stunned and moved by your story. I mean, that's it's really putting it well. That it seems like you were able to carve out some authenticity that might have been not there prior, from your perspective. Is that fair?
Yes, definitely. I usually suppressed any of those feelings before because they weren't in line, with the type of ideas and philosophies of the church. You really just didn't want to push those things too far, and I was able to just come into understanding myself and in shedding away those feelings of fear that went with, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing what God wants? And I was able to sort of come to understand myself, and that is a wonderful thing. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Well, so that's the internal part. That's very powerful. How does it affect the external part? Like, how does it affect the people, places, and things you relate to now that are different than when they once were?
Well, a lot of things. I'm still the same person, so some of those things are the same. I was interested in archaeology and travel before, when I was still a member of the church. I still am, but what it does for me, and the relationships that I have with my family and things like that is since they were able to see what I've done, and the new people that I meet, I let them know about the different journey that I took, about how I believed in something and how I don't. I always ask people questions, and talk to them about, just being okay to ask more questions, and understanding the quality of life, and trying to embrace life on life's terms, and not necessarily believing in a religion just because you're told to believe in it, and I have to be very tactful on how I do that, because I'm not trying to necessarily pull anybody out of it. But my mother is a wonderful example of how, it was 2 summers ago. We were sitting down in a restaurant, and she said to me, "So do you really think that Brigham Young and Joseph Smith knew that they weren't real prophets? And that it wasn't a true, and I mean, it's incredible to see people kind of go through their own process of realizing that certain baseline beliefs, and it's really hard to shake these baseline beliefs. When you're indoctrinated as a youngster, it takes so many more years to realize that wasn't true, because I think it has to do with how our brain develops. It develops a certain way, and when we have just everything set up to believe in these ideologies that we realize aren't true, but it's still difficult to understand how come they're not true and how come I believed them. And it just so I was able to see my mom kind of go through her own process of realizing these things, and I think it helps to do it in a very gradual way. Everybody needs to do it on their own time.
Yeah, you described some of the social aspects of being exposed to different beliefs as being part of the factor that helped spark at least some of those questions. And now you are an agent of that. I think it's commendable that you also see people situated in the context of a belief, how entrenched they can be in that belief, and their whole social lives and identities and all of that are sort of forged on that foundation. So it is, you are playing with fire if you really do, like, go in with the swords ablazing, I guess. And it sounds to me like you have a real consideration for the value proposition that it is from that individual's perspective.
Not only is it valuable to them to such a degree that their life literally depends upon it, you know, in a way, but also I remember my own process, and I remember that the people that affected me the most were the ones that never challenged me. They were the ones that just, they'd look at me, and I could see it in their eyes that they kind of felt sorry for me, you know, that I believed like this, but at the same time they always were encouraging. And those were the ones that actually made me question more internally. And so I think that is a beneficial way to do it.
If you could help us to understand, well, I'm guessing here, but I'm pretty certain of this. There are some upsides and some downsides to this transition process that have happened. Can you characterize, if you would, some of the downsides and some of the upsides that come along with this transition?
Well, I think that one of the downsides is what I call the paradigm swing, or the pendulum swing, basically, but it's a paradigm and a pendulum swing. Sometimes when we leave things like I did, you you want to search, but you don't necessarily search in a rational or logical way. Instead, what you do is you embrace maybe other philosophies that are just as illogical. They're founded on the same principles, but they're the opposite. You know, like Satanism, for example, or Wicca. You know, things that also believe in gods, goddesses, but also kind of maybe there's a dark side to it. So I think that what happens is that not everybody comes out of it being skeptical and rational. They kind of go through their own process of shedding these things. So what I did was, I didn't think that a belief in no gods was even possible, so I got into looking into Eastern philosophies and Wicca. And because I thought, hey, if Satan's real, maybe he's the one to talk to, you know. And then of course it just all of it eventually disappeared. All of those beliefs left. But you know, I think that's a downside. You know, that's kind of a downside because you still haven't gotten to the point where you're able to face life on the reality situation.
Do you think that if there had been a better socially defined network, a place for you to land as a newly minted non-believer that could help you make that transition, that it might have made it a little bit easier?
Definitely. Yeah, you know, the internet structure wasn't set up the way that it is now back then. And if there had been a community like this when I had left, I could have probably gone through the process years and years quicker. And so this type of community for people who are looking, for people who maybe are questioning their faith, or have just left their faith and are wanting to get some, you know, some groundwork laid, this is a wonderful thing that's happening. Also, you know, outreach programs within individual communities would be great. Secular humanists groups and different things like that, I think, would be so wonderful for people to land into, because the only things that were available to me at that time were very new age types of groups, and it just didn't give me it didn't give me the actual, it just didn't help my mind think about things properly. It was kind of diverting my mind into still thinking in a very religious orientated way.
Something you said earlier too struck me, that the people that influenced you the most during the transitional phase were not those that came out with the attack against your existing paradigm, but that communicated, telegraphed in some way, and if I'm mischaracterizing, if you could correct me, that you matter, and that there's something that if you knew, that it would be valuable, and they were trying to telegraph that sort of sentiment that you are missing an ingredient that would be helpful if you knew it. And I think that when you come onto the internet, there are some times when that swords a-blazing, punching back and forth mud wrestling match between theism and non-theism, characterized as the great debate, goes on, that's not exactly what persuaded you. Do you think that that would be useful too, or that it is useful as a tool of persuasion?
And that's one of the things whenever I go into hangouts where there are swords blazing, so to speak, or atheists and theists. I really do try to take the approach that these people matter, and that they just don't have that ingredient. It's still just missing, and it needs to be nourished, but you have to do it in their time. And if you don't have the time to do it in their time, it's not going to happen.
So you're saying that a person needs to be thirsty and in order to actually absorb the drink.
I'm saying that even as the person trying to dissuade the theist, you have to be thirsty to actually care about the actual individual person. And if you care more about the ideologies and you're just trying to bang those into people, you're never going to get it.
Fair enough. If there was anything that you could share with the people of your former belief matrix that you feel like would be of grand value for them to actually get, that you have gained as a result of your transition, what would that be, and why do you think it's valuable?
Well, I wish more than anything else that they were able to live life on life's terms without a thought of an afterlife. If they were actually able to embrace the beauty and reality of this wonderful life without thinking that there's something afterward, I think that they'd actually really, they might do things a little differently. They might pursue their dreams just a little differently.
How do you think that would translate into their lives in a way that's positive?
Well, if they knew that worlds upon worlds were not going to be at their fingertips as soon as they passed away, maybe they would travel more. Maybe they would write or communicate or give to just whatever it is that they were write music or pursue different things. Maybe they would actually embrace all of those things now. So just
good points, all good points. I think that if I'm understanding what you're saying, is that the focal point would shift to what it would be that they could do to generate a value of their own experience and that which they share with others here, as opposed to focusing on that eternal thing, and this being the minor player.
Yeah, yes, exactly, because as far as Mormons go, you are a worker bee. I mean, even the Deseret beehive is a huge symbol of the church, the Mormon church, and as that, you are considered a worker. You have a purpose. You are here for God's mission, and not that doesn't bring a certain quality of life to their lives. It does, but if they were actually able to look at things from the perspective that I'm looking at it, they might start looking at those individual desires just a little bit more. And that would bring them happiness, I hope.
Very good. It certainly seems to have brought you some. I mean, have your own creative energies and willingness to explore new things as a result of your newfound belief matrix served you well? In other words, has it been positive, and in what way?
Oh yeah, it's been very positive. For the most part, it has been very positive. I'm an individual person with my own individual struggles, but I think that the wonderful thing about embracing life on life's terms is that you actually have to face them and deal with them and overcome them, and then you are able to pursue those dreams and those those things that make you feel content and happy and in creativity. And the thing about it is leaving something, to make the world a little bit of a better place, leaving a little bit of a legacy behind you, because that is the one gift that you are able to give to the world when you don't think of an afterlife. It's what you're able to give here and now. And I think that's a wonderful mindset to have.
Well, I think on that thought, we can pretty much leave that as the punctuation point, because it sure is a powerful one. I do thank you for being willing to share not only the transition, but some of the things that you faced along the way. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Thanks, Lyrical. That was awesome, as I figured it would be.
Oh, thank you, James, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, okay, we're still live, and we can have other discussion, but that was just the segment that was balled into these questions. So, yeah, your story is very compelling, and I think it's going to be quite useful for some people to be able to frame their own process of why they hold beliefs, what they might consider questioning, and how it is that might relate to their lives. So, yeah, this is cool.
Well, I think it's a wonderful type of discussion that you guys are wanting to have about those things, and I to hear other people's stories about how they were able to find that ingredient to pull themselves into higher ways of thinking or learning. So yeah.
Yeah, I was curious, did you have, from what you were saying, it sounded to me like when you first came out, you said, well, the pendulum was all the way over here, so maybe this is where it ought to be because, and so forth. So there was kind of an almost, if it isn't this, it has to be that, kind of a bifurcation. And I'm wondering if part of the unspoken belief structure that you were exposed to was it's either this or that. It's black or white. There are no grays. There is no shadings of expression. There is no way for you to cultivate your own unique experience. It's this or that. And that you were almost unintentionally maybe using that unspoken belief matrix in order to explore your new reality.
Yeah, it's the common false dichotomy idea that if it's not this, it's that. Absolutely right. It's never this or that. There's always a third option, or possibly more. And it was, and I see it happen all the time in this community, where I hear Christians say, well, if this isn't true, then that means that we, this terrible possible other alternative, because in their mind, that is the only other option.
Yeah, because I base all of my morality on this. If you don't have this, you cannot have morality.
Yes, that is a wonderful.
Well, I mean, it's not even that. I mean, how many times have we heard prominent evangelical Christians come out and say, if I didn't have God, I'd be out raping and murdering people. Well, keep your belief. If believing in God is keeping you from doing that shit, then you better keep believing.
Well, I think it's probably more accurate to say that that it's hard to conceptualize a different point of view if you're already framing it through this lens. In other words, it's hard for you to put yourself in another ideological matrix if you've never really experienced it. And even Lyrical, you described the transitional process as being difficult and I'm sure probably still ongoing. That belief system has a radioactive half-life, for lack of a better word, and that still has to perhaps affect you in ways that you still need to ferret out and maybe refine over time.
Definitely, but I think a lot of the Christians that are in this community, in my humble opinion, are actually laying the mental subconscious groundwork for their eventual deconversion.
I think there might be some dispute with that. At least, sincere, maybe wrong, but sincere dispute with that.
Yeah, not every single one of them, but definitely there's a few that are they're asking certain questions, or they're talking about certain ideas, and sometimes even if you are against those ideas, you know, even if you're the one saying to the atheist they're wrong, they're wrong, they're wrong, it's still making them think about things, and to think about things is the beginning of being able to lay that mental groundwork that gives you that cushion, that padding to realize there is a middle ground, you know, that there is a place to go outside of the belief structure. And when you have that is when you're able to kind of tip your toes around the corner and say, you know, and look, and sometimes, you know, people are able to shed the entire belief structure because they have a new place to go, a new mental.
Yeah, I think that is you're tapping into something that is really crucial. Is that part of the reason? I don't know, reason probably isn't the word, but the right word. But the part of the thing that inspires us to believe certain things is its social glue utility, that it binds us to a community. And you discovered things that sort of isolated you from one community. You didn't even know if there'd be another one. And I am not sure that everyone has the kind of intestinal fortitude to actually carve a path that is predicated on what you sincerely believe and sort of fearless exploration as you did. So with that being said, I can appreciate the fact that you can look back and say, there is somebody that sincerely believes and that their whole life is hinged on that, and that's a delicate ground to sort of work with, that you might not want to just go in with a torch and burn it all down.
No, you know, I made a video a long time ago. This video isn't up anymore, but it was called Pruning Lettuce and Beliefs, because I'm a gardener, and I'm out in my garden, and I'm taking some lettuce leaves off of a big head of lettuce, and the reason that I don't just pull the root out is because if I take some lettuce leaves off, it will still grow, and then it will seed, and I'll have thousands of seeds from this plant that I can eventually replant, and still use the lettuce, you know, still go make a salad. But if I just rip out the roots, not only does the lettuce die, but I don't get the seeds from it either. And so I use a lot of that philosophy in my life when I talk to religious people. Is I'll just talk to them about their beliefs, and I'll say, well, you know, let's talk about this, and why do you believe this, and what if this wasn't true? How would that make you feel? You know, and just very slowly go through the process, because I was there, you know, and I do remember it. I do still understand what it's like to feel that way, you know, and for them to even be able to just take that first initial little step is in my opinion a huge step.
Yeah, and yours, you know, that sparks me to think that throwing out the baby with the bathwater is not the greatest of strategies either. That some of the stories that are told in the framework of religion do have an excellent utilitarian framework, and one of them being the garden. That it does seem to me like we can cultivate things to fruition, and that gives us the opportunity to recognize the value of the fact that while you can count the seeds in an apple, you can't count the apples in a seed if you cultivate them properly. So
yes, very true. There is, you know, and also one of the things that that is missing a lot is just the human the individual's value. You know, sometimes we just don't care about that person enough to take them through it, and also some people just don't want to take them through it, you know, because that's a big challenge, you know, and a person kind of, no matter how good you are leading them through kind of this journey, if you will, they're going to experience some darkness, you know, they might have some really depressed days because of it, and that's not something that a lot of people really want to maybe take on. It's easier to attack the actual belief system, but when you care about the person and they know that they're cared for, it's something different does happen. It's a different type of thing that happens within them, that they're able to actually expand themselves out in a different way mentally. They're able to open themselves up. because they know that they're in a safe place, that you're actually asking these questions because you care about them is something that's totally different from them being completely shut down, closed off, defensive because you're attacking their belief system.
Yeah, I think that I forget the guy's name. Oh, Robert J. Lifton. Robert J. Lifton said there are characteristics of a psychological totalism, is what he calls. Some people call it brainwashing or whatever. But one of the points in there was how at some point in time doctrine evolves to be more important than person, and I think that's what differentiates the two, is that whether or not you're telling somebody something because you care about the person, or whether or not you're telling somebody something because you care about the doctrine. And that does change the emotional dynamic and the value proposition from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, and it's not about ranking up deconversions as a Christian would rank up conversions. It's all it's not for a notch on your belt or something like that. It really is just caring about their quality of life. And if you understand that by shedding away wrong belief systems will eventually improve their quality of life, then sometimes you can take an approach to talk to them about those types of things. It's never easy. It's a huge ego slam when you realize that something that you've believed in isn't true, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, but understanding it intellectually and actually being a different person has to be a struggle, a separate struggle all on its own. Like you had differentiated between the map and the journey. You have to go. You can get a map, but then you have to go on the journey. That wandering in the desert story is probably a good example of a way to see it metaphorically. With that in mind, you were brought up to believe that this is sin and that you should feel bad if you have this thought or urge or conduct this behavior and so forth. And once you realized intellectually that that wasn't true, did it take you a while to be able to embrace that as a part of your emotional being? In other words, did the sin doctrination, for lack of a better word, have a residual effect on your life even after you cross the intellectual threshold to a different belief matrix?
That's a good question. I think that the actual, I think that how can I put it? Before I actually crossed the threshold where I didn't believe anymore, I had already started to lay the foundation in my mind that these things weren't sinful as much as they said they were. And because I was able to have already laid that groundwork, by the time that I crossed the threshold, I really didn't give it much of a second thought.
So you had already grappled with it.
Right, exactly.
But it was a struggle?
Yeah, definitely. It was a struggle during the grappling part. Yeah, of course. It was painfully struggling. Personally, I felt like I had to repent quite a bit.
Well, I know for me, it was simple things like, I grew up in a community here where it's a relatively active homosexual community, and I was told growing up that those people are evil and wicked, and yet some of them were my friends. And part of my coming out of religion was because these people I cared about, and I'm not supposed to care about them because God hates them and they're going to hell, right? So that never made any sense to me, that these people who are loving, generous, genuine people were wicked and evil because of the way they are. I could never resolve that one. So it wasn't sin to me because these people were the most normal people I'd ever met. They were just who they were. They didn't pretend.
Yeah, that's a good way to be able to pull yourself out of it, is when you realize that the things that people are being condemned for, they shouldn't be condemned for, especially in that case.
Right. It's like we call things sinful because God does, and yet God is the one who does all these things.
Or the church leaders do, anyway.
Well, the Bible says this is sin, this is wrong, blah, blah, whatever it is, right? Premarital sex is wrong. Although, it depends on which version you read. Young women were sent to be wives, and, it's all in there. Premarital sex is wrong, and incest is wrong, and yet Lot is considered a father of the faith, and he had sex with both of his daughters. So
well, they got drunk first.
It doesn't matter. He's still considered one of the heroes of the faith if you read in Hebrews.
Oh no, I
right. So this is what God says is okay, and if you believe both accounts, Genesis after the Adam and Eve, you have two people with two sons. One gets killed. You would so either believe that there were other people in the land of Nod, or Eve was having sex with their son, to have more baby. Like the thing's astonishing to even think about. And then you have 8 people repopulating the whole world. So the cousins are all having sex with each other. That's incest according to most legal standards. In most countries, first cousins aren't allowed to marry for a reason. So you've got incest being promoted by this God who says that it's wrong. Like, hello?
Well, yeah, the story of Lot stands on its own that's promoting incest because of a bloodline. It has to do with the fact of that, he was a covenant keeper, and his line needed to be passed on. He had some type of genetics that needed to be passed on. It was very...
Surely there could have been another way to promulgate the species in that lineage other than, well, let's have sex with my daughters. That was God's best idea.
Another video I made a long time ago was Abraham didn't seem like a righteous man, and it was kind of going into the fact that at first when his wife was Sarai and she was with the Pharaoh, and he lied and said it was his sister because he didn't want to be killed, and so it's okay for him to lie, it's okay for him to give his wife to another man, and all of these things just to get out of being killed. That doesn't sound very righteous. And then when she ends up not being able to bear children, and he gets Ishmael, and then he sends Ishmael and the mother away, that doesn't sound like the right thing to do just because Sarah didn't want him around anymore. Abraham, what's going on, dude? You don't seem like you're being a speaker for some type of God I'd ever want to follow. But you don't question it. You don't even question the righteousness of the man when you're in that belief system, because he's told that he is righteous. He is a prophet. He is in God's will.
Well,
so that's God's will.
That's right. This is the problem. This is the problem of evil, right? I mean, is something God's morality? Is something good because God says so, or something? Does God say this is good because it is good, or is it good because God said so? Like, how do you resolve that as a Christian? You can't, because one way or the other, it's not a great argument, but it's like, how do you resolve that? Because if you read the Bible, well, God says this is good, this is bad, but does both.
Well, that's the old covenant. It doesn't apply.
I don't care. Then it doesn't. Either if it's the old covenant, then Adam and Eve didn't exist either, and you can throw out the 10 Commandments because they're in the Old Testament too. So you can't have it both ways.
The biggest testament against moral Christian morality, based on the Bible, is what Jesus tells Christians to do and how they can't live up to that standard. Give all of your money away and live, basically live as just kind of a wanderer. Never look at a woman and even lust upon her. There's a lot of different things that Christians can never follow that moral standard, and yet that's their moral standard. And it's not, though. Even this is what I've argued with Christians about, is that you say that you get your morality from God. You don't. You don't get your morality from God.
You're absolutely right.
No. You get it from the same place that we get it, which is a social construct of morality.
Yeah, it's a secular device used to unite a group. We don't tolerate this. We don't tolerate that. This is okay. This isn't okay.
Yeah, that brings me to like one of the programs that we have coming up on things that matter or that we want to cover is what role do established social structures play in shaping beliefs? And I think that you're pointing out how important social constructs are to shaping the way that we do see and do things.
Yeah, I think a person that lives in the woods and just reads the Bible would be a very different kind of Christian than the ones that go to the church and have that group morality, that group morale. Oh, this person's doing that, and you're not supposed to do that. And oh, these types of things that go along with it.
Good point. Very
I
good
agree.
point.
There's a lot of peer pressure.
Or if a whole nother planet emerged and nobody had any of the trappings of our existing culture, would Christianity or whatever emerge?
Yeah, and if all the churches were scrapped and we just took sola scriptura on an individual basis, would it even be the same Christianity? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
another one we got coming up is why do people do things that are debilitating to themselves and others?
And why do people eat granola bars on camera?
Oh God! Don't pull an audio on us, okay?
That's an age-old question. I don't know if. Yeah. So another one coming up is are we asking the right questions? So would you be interested in participating in some of these upcoming ones?
Sure. Anytime you ever would like to have me as part of the panel, I would always love to contribute.
I really, I've come to really appreciate not only your perspective, but your insight and capacity to communicate. Like I said, we're trying to craft something that'll be useful for people to grow from.
Yeah. I remember when you first got here. You remember some of those early hangouts?
Knock it off, you.
Okay, what happened?
Let's just say she's grown an awful lot. She's not the same person for sure, and that's a good thing.
Yeah,
So,
I've learned a lot. I was able to strip away some of my own egotistical, I guess you could say, beliefs that I had come to think were just because I'm of a belief structure at this point in my life. I am of a belief structure that is very fluid and is based on reality and true concepts. And if you can express true concepts to me and I'm open because I'm open to them, I'm able to shed some of that that baggage that's still kind of, I'm dropping stuff here and dropping stuff there because it doesn't serve me, and I realize that it doesn't serve me.
It's, you're describing something to me that I was somebody echoing?
Not me, I've got headphones in.
Oh, I'll mute myself, I'm not sure.
It's you. Yeah, it's you.
So it is the something that you were talking about that was sort of as a subtext, or I was picking up as a subtext, was the power of not knowing. In other words, you came from a belief matrix that had certain answers for everything and moved into a paradigm that actually had the demand for an exploratory element to it. And so you are now learning and growing, whereas before you had already arrived and it was interpreted through a very specific lens and all of that. And I'm just wondering how you feel about the new territory that isn't quite as defined versus the old one that is more certain. It sounds to me like you actually embrace this thing, even though on the surface it might appear to be less certain.
Yeah, the uncertainty and the mystery about life is not scary anymore. It actually is a wonderful thing to not believe in any structured belief system that I don't understand yet, and that's why I try to ask a lot of questions and ask, to present my ideas in a very open way, and a lot of times people will guide me to information, to books, to resources, and those have been invaluable. Yeah, it's a continuing process.
I think we get stuck on the philosophical garbage of certainty and knowing. I don't honestly think that as a species here on this planet right now, we can kind of get a sense of what's going on, but we really don't know enough to say, yeah, we know this. You know, it's changing so fast. Even what, like with you for Lyrical and I, we do manual therapy. What's happened in the last 10 years is drastically changed the approach of how we treat the body, because we've learned so many things. And it's like so how can we even say, well, we're certain about this? Yeah, this is a pen, but that's so we've made this. But when we're talking about things we don't really understand at all, and then we say, oh, I'm certain about this. Now I used to want that certainty. I don't need it anymore, because the awe of the wonder of learning and finding new things out is far more exciting and invigorating to me than knowing something. You know what I mean?
I think that the philosophical concept of certainty is actually incredibly provocative to me, because how much can anybody truly be certain of? You know, it's actually a very interesting discussion, and I'd love to hear Ozzy's, you know, argument up with it, and other people like that. You know, Bert Poole is another one that I really enjoy hearing, because the argument of certainty it's a fluid structure, and so it almost is a non-concept in a certain way, because, like you said, things that we believe are certain have the ability to be shown that they are uncertain, even as certain as we think that they are at this point. We learn different things about them that change our entire perspective, or at least nuance the perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, consciousness is one of those things that I think that or the fact that something exists. This is something. This here is something. I could be deluded. It could be that I am, unbeknownst to me, a solipsist, and everything else is a projection of my own mind, and I'm deluded to think that everyone else is real and all of that. So yeah, there's uncertainty in everything beyond the fact that something exists. But it does appear like we can be certain of that, and then beyond that, everything comes with a side dish of probabilistic nature.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a very interesting discussion, because, you know, and when a person embraces the fact that they are not, at this point in their life, right here, at this time of, you know, 10:58 on Friday morning, that they don't know everything about life, that every answer hasn't been solved, that they are not certain about everything, it's a good way to feel, really, because it expresses the fact that there are still things to be learned, and that when you don't take the ego slam that you've been wrong about something, but you can just shake it off like, oh, you know, I thought this one way, and now I don't think that way anymore, because I didn't have all the information. You know, I was incorrect on the way that I was thinking because I needed more information. You know, it's just not. It just changes the entire way that you grasp information and digest it.
Yeah, it's like if something shows me to be wrong, it doesn't threaten my existence. And that's part of the problem when you're fundamentalist. If something, like when I started actually reading the history of how the Bible was put together and the lack of archaeological findings of any of it, that can destroy and devastate your worldview when you realize that you've based your entire life on something that's not true. So you're going to fight back, and you're not going to want to accept that if you are unwilling, or you have to be certain about, well, this is true because it says it's true.
I think, too, that we get used to fighting for our ideology, that we just go into that mode. After a while, it just becomes a habit. I sense your attack line, and I am responding with, and so it becomes a rote chess game as opposed to an actual consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree that there's definitely the bottom up and the top down approach, you know, and when you have when you're looking at reality as the neutral ground, and you have your belief system basing framing that way that you're looking at it, you know, you're using the bottom up. But when you don't have that structure and you're really just trying to look at the observations and come to some conclusions, you know, some rational conclusions about it, you're able to really you're able to look at it in a different way, you know, and you're able to kind of take in more information without the biased helmet on. It's kind of, yeah, it's messing things up. All right, guys, I'm going to have to run because I have some other things that I need to do. But
Thanks for stopping by,
Ulrico. And I'll see you guys around.
All right, take care. We'll let you know when things come up.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, that was an interesting 4 hours, eh?
That was an awesome 4 hours. You know, this is. I can sense that this is going to be fun. Like all these topics that we're covering and blah, and then I think I can envision like getting better at honing the questions so that they'll all fit into something that is transmittable to other people and become more valuable and all of that. So I just have a sense that we're on to something really good.
Go off there. Take us off air.
Yeah. Okay. Nobody's watching anyway.
I know, but take it off air, then you don't have to edit it.
Yeah, that's true.